Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this is our Midrash for Parashat Shoftim. And we're talking about the comforts of a Torah government, which, to be quite frank, is that we get to live and we get to go back home to the land. So this parasha applies for anyone who wants to live and to dwell safely in the land. We're going to take a lot of the material if you want to study in more detail. This is from the Torah Government Study. I imagine the rabbis would find this interesting, what the Torah actually says they're supposed to teach. And it's the things that Ephraim and Judah are actually supposed to do, especially if you call yourself a believer in Messiah Yeshua. We have to take Yeshua at his face value. We have to take him for what he said. And he says, whoever hears these sayings of mine, we're reading his word, and does them, meaning all of them, I will liken him to a wise man who's built his house on the rock, because he's building Yeshua's kingdom. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. It was obeying the commandments and the directions of the rock, Yeshua. Verse 26, he says, but everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came in the end times, and tribulation, time of Jacob's trouble, and the winds blew and beat on that house. So we're told that we will have tribulation, and it fell. And this describes at least 90% of the Ephraimite movement, and great was its fall. And I don't know how else to say. I just keep in prayer for us all that we can take Yeshua's words to heart. There's so many of us. I'm very thankful, praise Yahweh, that so many, more people are tuning in, more people are hearing the original faith message, more people are hearing the original kingdom message, that Yeshua came as Mashiach Nagid at the end of the Second Temple period, and this was his message, how to go forth into the world, creating disciples in order to establish his true kingdom. And for the Messianic movement, I just pray that we can turn back to keeping all of Yeshua's word, because it doesn't make any sense to say that we love him, and we know he says, if you love me, then keep all of my commandments. We read, keep his commandments. Yeah, the Sabbath, we rest and read, and we take the feasts. Yeah, we're keeping his commandments. Yeah, because he was teaching his father's Torah. Yeah, but are we keeping all of his commandments? Because as we saw in previous parashot, if we don't keep all of his commandments, he considers that we hate him. And it doesn't end well like that. He doesn't like lukewarm. So, Father willing, we know that only 10% of Ephraim is going to hear this message, less of Judah until Armageddon. But we just want to do our very best job of helping people to understand what our husband, our king, our leader, our rabbi, our one and only rabbi, what he wants us to do. And when we go to imitate him, we should imitate him in a way that builds his kingdom. And we know from our studies in Hosea and other places that the time is coming very soon that 90% of Ephraim won't make it. And as it says in Yeshayahu, or Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 22, I want to say this lovingly, but I want people to understand just how serious this is, that we not take him as a joke, that we not insult him by a lack of fruit, by a lack of actions. He says, and in context, he's talking about Ephraim. He says, for though your people, O Israel, Ephraim, be as the sand of the sea, yet only a remnant of them are going to return. And it says, the destruction decreed shall overflow with righteousness. And we talk about how we arrive at the 10% survival rate number in the study, Revelation of the End Times. But that's for Ephraim. And just frankly, brother, I want to deliver this message in love. Our goal here is to speak the truth in love and to lift Yeshua up and show how he did come as Mashiach the leader, Mashiach the director, Mashiach, the prince. And we need to testify of him not only through our words, but also through our actions by doing everything that he said. And this is so important. And we know that only 10% of us ultimately are going to take the discipline to do everything that he said and to walk actually as he walked, as a Jew, as a late second temple period Jew. He's our only rabbi, but that's what you do with a rabbi is you imitate him. So how many of us are loving him to the point that we're imitating him? So Ephraim, well, he's speaking to Judah here in Matthew chapter 21, starting in verse 43. And he says, therefore I say to you, the kingdom of Elohim, he's talking to Judah, because Judah's following, it wasn't the Talmud yet, it was still the Zugot pairs. So therefore I say to you, because you're following the Zugot pairs, instead of the Torah of Moshe, the kingdom, instead of following what will become the Tanakh, the kingdom of Elohim will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it, bearing righteous fruits. Righteousness means keeping his commandments. So obeying all of his commandments, to give him a full crop of fruit and not to cheat him in the fruit. And he says, and whoever falls on this stone, you have to be broken in spirit. You can't do things your own way. You can't behave presumptuously anymore. You can't call yourself by his name and not do what he says. He says, or it's going to fall on you and it will grind you to powder. So you preach this kind of a message, 90% of the people go away, and hopefully you're left with the 10% who actually want to obey his word. Plus, of course, we know we have some lovely comments from Brother Judah each week. But just to remind everyone, especially Levi, Brother Judah, the original goal, as we've spoken many times before, is that Yahweh created us as gardeners. And he wanted us to form one family that worked together to love each other, take care of each other, so we could take better care of his planet. Now, getting there, that's a long story. Originally, we were there in Eden. We were in his favor, but then we didn't want to obey because we figure we can disobey Yahweh. He won't know the difference. But of course, he does know the difference, so we fell. And as we mentioned before, now we have to take the staircase or the ladder, so to speak, of steps back up to where we should have been from the very first place. Don't know, drop a seed in the ground and watch it grow over the years. So up it comes. First, you have Noah, who takes care of himself and his family. Then Abraham has to leave his family. Then Moshe is used to form the nation. King David is used to establish, Shaul established, but David established righteous kingship. Righteous meaning he listened to Yahweh's voice and did everything Yahweh's voice said, including all of his written commandments. He hastened to keep Yahweh's commandments. Then we had Yeshua, the son of David, who also hastened to keep all of Yahweh's commandments and began a long regathering process that would eventually bring in the house of Ephraim 2,000 years later. So as we've spoken about before, we are working toward the Ezekiel 37 stick unification and the eventual regathering, and then the eventual establishment of the millennial Nasi in Ezekiel 44 through 46 and 47, 48, of course, so that we can eventually reestablish the conditions of Eden. We can extend them to the whole earth. And most people don't want to participate. That's why it has to be a kingdom. Judah understands the concept of a global kingdom. And now it's Ephraim's turn to understand the concept of a global kingdom. Just like our Mashiach speaks about putting the kingdom first. So here we go. Ball's in our court. Judah has already done his part in this. You could point to flaws and errors and theological problems, and they're all there. But notice, as it says in Yehezkel, Ezekiel 37, starting in verse 16, it says, as for you, son of man, take a stick for yourself. So you have to form it yourself and write on it for Judah, the children of Israel, his companions. and this was the Zionist movement, as we'll see. That's done. And 51 years later, it culminated in the establishment of the state of Israel. So now, because Judah organized and took a stick for himself, now Judah has a land. Now Judah is a people in his own land. And Caleb was given the land because Caleb jumped up first, with speaking it was a good land. Ephraim was right there, but Caleb jumped up first. Well, now guess what? There's taking another stick and writing on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. But that has not yet been done. Judah had to take a stick for himself. Judah had to establish the comforts of having a Torah government. We're going to talk about those in just a second. And then once this stick is formed, then the stick of Joseph, or the stick of Ephraim, the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim, can be joined together with it, we'll see in other verses, with the stick of Judah, which is already back in the land. So I just want to mention this. We spent 1,260 years in the house of Esau. And again, as we've spoken before, we actually owe Esau a debt of gratitude because we were in paganism, worshiping whatever, rocks, trees, sticks, you name it, we were worshiping it. So Esau actually forced us into the Catholic Church at the point of the sword, be there or be dead. And eventually we were brought back into the faith. Praise Yahweh. So then we had the opportunity to leave Esau's house at the end of the times, and half a times of Daniel 7, the 1,260 years. And now you had the Protestant Reformation, and as we talk about in Torah government and other studies, there's just a complete fragmentation, a complete breaking down and pulverization and individualization of our nation. So it's no longer the nation of Ephraim. Now it's a bunch of individuals, or you have individual families. And I've seen some families out there who have some real dedication. I want to compliment, actually, there's several families I can see who have made us, they're going to serve Yahweh according to their understanding. But brothers, how do we get those families to come together? How do we get those individuals, one from a city, two from a family, how do we get them to come together to form the necessary stick? So, and I just think, I just know from having sort of grown up in the Messianic movement, starting in 57, 59, or 1999, Yahweh brought me straight in. And again, I don't know, autism is probably, in biblical terms, it'd be something like some kind of a tying of the tongue. So it's difficulties in communication. You see and you perceive a lot more than you're able to speak typically. But I've seen so many things in the Messianic movement, and it just strikes me that there's no understanding of the global scope of what's going on. So just to illustrate the point, now, bear in mind, okay, this is Brother Judah. He curses us and asks for our death and the deaths of all other Jewish sects, okay, all Christians, all Catholics, all Messianics, all Nazarenes, all, and also Karaites, Reform Jews, secular Jews. They pray for this, and according to their theology, which is correct, well, be careful how I say this, according to their theology, if you get an opportunity to further your prayer, then of course you want to take action in accordance with that. And I think there's a lot of Ephraim who doesn't understand just how seriously Judah takes this. And so when we finish this Parashat series, we hope to work on some documentaries which help to drive the point home of just exactly where we're at in this process. Okay, Brother Judah takes this dead seriously. And one of the reasons why is he thinks that all Christians are Esau. He knows about Josephite Christians, but he doesn't want you to know that he knows. Okay, check out the book Kol HaTorah. That's where they've known that at least for 200 years. And typically these kinds of prophecies, the author will read many other books before he puts his together. So this knowledge could go back as far as the days of King Rehoboam. We don't know, but the language here is very serious. And so what this means in practical terms, just sort of to cut to the chase, is that we need to differentiate ourselves from Esau, because Esau is not supposed to survive what's coming. Okay, does that make sense to you? And there's a lot of people, I believe, who think that they're pure white horse, that from my point of view, from my perspective, they're still very much in the red horse. They're still very much under this curse. The white horse is presently under this curse. I just have a feeling Judah's not going to kill Joseph, at least not at first. So I just, you want to speak the truth in love, and you want people to understand just how dire this is, just how serious this situation is. Because you see Ephraimite leaders, and they're going to Israel, and one sister's like handing out teddy bears in the shuk, and people taking all kind of, and it just is like Ephraim's concept of what constitutes organized, disciplined action to form a stick of Joseph. You have to wonder, So just to drive home the point of the seriousness of just how serious this situation is. So this is from Haaretz. I forget this is a few years ago. And I mean, this is knowledge. This is public knowledge in Judah. They already know that Orthodox Jews curse Christians, ask for their death, pray for their death 3 times each weekday, 18 times a week, 936 times per year per practicing Orthodox Jew. So there's about 2.2 million practicing Orthodox Jews saying 936 death curses each year. Someone can do the math. That's a lot of death curses. We're talking about transmitting, if you wanted to get new age about it, just transmitting massive negative energy. Okay, well, Yeshua would say they're not operating in the light. Or the renewed covenant writers would say they're not operating in the light. Okay, so anyone who hates his brother, and they know we're Joseph. Okay, so they may not know what to do with this. They want us to convert to Orthodox Judaism, but there needs to be a real reconciliation here. But how can Judah want to recognize Joseph? Why would Judah want to recognize Joseph? What they see is a bunch of fragmented nothing, quite frankly. I tell you again, I want to tell you more detail on this the other week. But when I was in Jerusalem, living in Jerusalem for about a year and 9 months till they kicked me out, basically, disallowed me to return because I didn't convert, basically. So this was in around 5764, which would be about 2004. And I was speaking with an Orthodox rabbi. And he was trying to help us. He was very much against Yeshua. And very much against Yeshua. It's like, I may have said some of this before, but I want to give some more detail. He was always, Yeshka, that man, and just whatever he could do. But he was also very helpful at the same time. So he was trying to help us to understand, because his thought was, a lot of the Orthodox think this, they think they saw us leave out the north gate. We took our golden calves and went home. So that's kind of what we did, except we went away. And now the general conception in Orthodox Judaism is that we left out before we had Yeshua. Why would we need Yeshua? Get this Yeshua out of here. Yeshua is like our modern day golden calf, according to Orthodox Judaism. So what we really need to do is we need to do something to show Brother Judah that we are a people. So, and it just so happens that that's what I was speaking about with this very helpful rabbi, who I'm going to leave unnamed because they really will persecute you bad for helping Nazarene, even accidentally. Even if you didn't mean to help them. He told me that Judaism requires the following thing, and Judaism just is very, very logical. Everything makes sense from a certain point of view. It's just they need to you need to step back and take a look at the big picture. So, but this is one of the things they do very well. because they're the kingship tribe. So, of course, what do they know? They know about kingship things. They know what constitutes a government, what constitutes a friendly nation, what constitutes a hostile nation. So apparently they know what constitutes an Esavite nation, sadly, and they also happen to know what constitutes an Ishmaelite nation, of course, and they also know what would constitute a Josephite nation if Joseph would do it. And we know, we pray, we see the prophecies saying that the time is coming very soon, brothers, if it's not already here. So we want to take advantage of this parashah, because Parashat Shoftim means judges. So he's trying to help us to understand how a population can be properly judged. And this is again, we most of us, we were raised by the wolves of the television set. We were raised by Esav, effectively. So we know that Zerah controls Esav because Black Horse controls red, money controls public opinion. So there you go. It takes time, but many of us were raised by the television set. We didn't have the benefit, the advantage of a devout home, this kind of a thing. Everyone's a mix, everyone's individual, everyone's unique. But what we have right now in the Ephraimite movement is a lot of individuals. We don't have a stick, we have a bunch of splinters and wood chips and sawdust. So we need to form that stick if we want to survive, which will give us comfort because we're following the Torah with regards to self-government. So that's what this teaching is all about. And he said that before Judaism is going to recognize you as a people, they want to see a population with a well-defined, they want to see a well-defined population with a well-defined body of belief. Okay, what is your culture? Because culture boils back to your cult. Okay, so your belief determines everything. Your belief determines your philosophy eventually determines your actions. So it boils back to what you believe. Okay, well, what do we believe? Okay, well, and there's a difference between what we say we believe and what we actually believe, as evidenced by our fruits, as evidenced by our actions. But if a people is serious about being a people, they're going to have some kind of an established government in order to be recognized by Brother Judah. And what that means in practical terms is you need a body of law, which that's what I've been working on since 57, 59, or at least 57, 60. You need a body of law and a way to manage disputes. And in practical terms, that means courts, which means that you need a single point of decision making. You think about even the era of the judges. It's true in the era of the patriarchs. This is true in the era of the judges. This is certainly true in Moshe's day. And it's true in Yeshua's day. Now, he says, so you need a single point of decision making with designated judges and officers. Because I'm talking with him, I was talking with every rabbi who would talk with us to explain that we are Ephraim. We want to come home. What do we have to do? So this rabbi was one of the few who was nice enough to come talk with me. He actually took me into Meir Shearim. Wasn't sure I was going to make it out, but it was good. So, there are rabbis who are amenable to the concept of Joseph coming home. So now we have to talk about terms and conditions. Again, with Kol HaTor, they know who we are. Just now we have to talk terms and conditions. So Judah wants to unify on Tanakh. We can't unify on Tanakh. Tanakh takes away our heritage as Joseph. If we were to convert to Orthodox Judaism or Talmudic Judaism, then they would like that a lot. It would only make Yahweh Elohim outraged. So we are supposed to be imitating our one and only rabbi, Yeshua. So imitating. So when Judah, it's like that saying, when a Jew reads the renewed covenant, it's like he's reading a totally different book than when an Ephraimite reads the renewed covenant. Because the Ephraimites, I think still, most of the people I've met, there's still this concept that that it was written in a vacuum, so to speak, and that it doesn't relate to the other. It can be taken on its own. There's still this sort of New Testament only Christianity, even in the Messianic realm. And there's a lot of people who believe in the Messianic movement that the renewed covenant replaces the Tanakh, And that's a holdover Esavite belief. And that's why Nazarene Israel is taking such care to separate from the Esavite Messianic movement. So if the stick of Ephraim is effectively an interim government to negotiate and to bring us back to the land of Israel, and just to say, I'm not sure if I said this last week, but Rav X, he was just, I'm so like, what do we need to be doing? And he's like, well, you need really seriously a single point of government. Because he says, I can't talk to you and 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 you. I need a single body to be able to talk with. And Ephraim, of course, back in those days, Ephraim just wanted to make Aliyah, go to the Jewish agency and get checklists so we could go join with a Babylonian democracy in land prior to the putting up of the third temple, at which point we will have to flee because our job is in the dispersion until Armageddon. Our job is to do the Great Commission, not the Great Omission, until Armageddon. So people just wanted to make Aliyah and move to the land and vote. That's what most of Messianic Ephraim's idea was. But if we take the biblical model of Torah government, which we're going to talk all about here this week, and if we take the biblical requirements, let's see how they stack up for an interim government compared. This is just a simple Google AI overview. And it says there is no simple step-by-step process for starting a new nation or a new stick, but there are some general requirements. We talked about this briefly, just to recap. So you have to have a territory that's controlled by brother Judah. The stick of Joseph is to be formed together with the existing stick of Judah after Armageddon, but there has to be a stick first. If you don't identify yourself as Joseph through your actions, then you're effectively identified with Esau by default. And Esau is not supposed to survive what's coming. And Judah knows that well. So you need a permanent population. In other words, you need to have basically a tax-paying citizen base. So you need a government that is required that can interact with other states. Because he says, I can't talk with you and 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 you. What do what do we think? Do you think the Sanhedrin can talk with you and 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 you? You think the Prime Minister Netanyahu can, or whoever the Prime Minister will be, can talk to you and you and you? No, he doesn't have time. He has to have a system, and Judah has a system, but Yahweh also has a system, and Judah has formed the stick of Judah according to their Babylonian system. If we form according to a Babylonian system or according to our own desires, our own presumptiveness, then Nazarene Israel wants nothing to do with it. But to do this Yahweh's way, if we're talking to Yahweh's people who truly love him, and they want to do what he wants them to do, and they want to survive, them and their families, what's coming. These are the things that are needed. So you need a constitution. Okay, well, we'll talk about this in more detail. We can say the Tanakh and the Brit Chadasha, that's our constitution. The Torah Moshe, the written Torah, that's our constitution. Because if you start in the Torah Moshe, you will eventually end up in the Tanakh. And if you end up in the Tanakh, you're eventually going to end up in the Brit Chadasha. Understanding that Yeshua fulfilled Daniel 9:25-26. So you need a constitution. That's Yahweh's words. Hear his voice, do everything he says, including all his written commandments. That's our constitution, because that's Yahweh's marching orders. Then you need a head of state. So we talk about serving the servants. It's not a top-down pyramidal government. It's more like a living tree model. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Then you need a diplomatic service. That can't be me. I'll speak the truth in love, but it's not always diplomatic. So Yeshua was not always diplomatic. The prophets were not always diplomatic. Moshe was not always diplomatic. So, and then again, you need an armed forces. Well, under the order of kings and priests, we do not have our own, we don't have a military. We don't have a temporal army. We have a spiritual army is what we're supposed to be fielding right now. So that's the order of kings and priests. We're supposed to have a spiritual army. We're supposed to have a spiritual nation that's organized according to these requirements in all nations. Times were, Esau understood that. I don't know if they still do, or they have different, we'll talk about that some other time. Ishmael surely understands the concept of extending a kingdom. Esau understands the concept of extending a kingdom by these principles, and Judah understands the concept of extending a kingdom. Okay, where is Ephraim? Will the real Ephraimites please stand up? So the same principle applies if we look at the renewed covenant. So we had an understanding back there in Acts chapter 15, and we'll see that that was a meeting that was required for unification, so there would be a single doctrine. However, as the faith progressed outside the land, because we had to go into the world, making even more disciples to establish Yeshua's true kingdom, things went off course because of the great falling away. So there was first Messianism. Then as it moved outside the land of Israel, where the Torah was not understood, there was Christian belief. And then from there, it devolved even further into a universal or a Catholic belief system and a belief set. And this is where you get the Trinity and the Council of Nicaea and the works of the Church Fathers and all this kind of thing. Okay, it's a Babylonian system. It's designed to imitate the worship of Yahweh with actually we're worshiping and incorporating elements of the ancient Babylonian mystery rites and religions. So then there was again, we broke away from Catholicism in the Protestant Reformation of 1517. And then 500 years later, there's just more and more fragmentation. So now there's independent pastors. The good is that people are reading their Bibles more, but now they're dividing more. So then now you have house churches, which is where they broke away even from the independent churches. And now you have a group of rebels, so to speak, a group of Ephraimite, stiff-necked rebels in their house churches. And they like it. It's comfortable. It's convenient. It's easy. You don't have to tithe. You don't have to do anything. You just hang out, show up, hang out, eat some lunch, read scripture together. You have a Bible study, and that's the extent of your Great Commission. And that's Messianic Israel. They promote that. They have all sorts of alternatives where you can learn about Yeshua without actually having to imitate or to walk like Yeshua walked. That's the Messianic movement. And everyone's scared of the next step. Everyone's scared of the next rung of the ladder, because the next rung of the ladder is we have to rebel against our own rebellion, Ephraimite brothers. We have to rebel back. And in fact, that's what the whole thing is about. We fell from his favor in the garden because we didn't want to obey him. We rebelled, and now we need to rebel back. And Yeshua is our doorway. He's our pathway back home. He's our ladder. We have to climb and become more and more like him. We need to do the things he wants us to do. And that's what's going to lead us to this two-stick unity. And then once we have two-stick unity, then we can extend the kingdom opportunity to Ishmael and to whoever else there is to eventually establish what Yahweh always wanted in the first place. Well, we can talk about this in other places, but again, we fell from the late Second Temple period, first century Acts 15 order of a single doctrine, unifying everyone, bringing everyone together on the Torah of Moshe and Yeshua's teachings, Yeshua's words, the words of Elohim, the words of the Spirit. And this is the faith we need to lift up, brothers and sisters. And the reason more people don't do it is precisely because it's not easy. The higher we go, the more we climb this ladder, the more narrow and afflicted of a pathway it becomes. So it becomes a question, what do we want? Do we love Yeshua enough? We want to serve him? Or do we just want to have some random family gatherings and individual family sovereignty and we're going to individuality, and we never really do get around to immersing true disciples? But if we will organize This organization will lead to true biblical nationhood because we're imitating our rabbi and we're doing what he said to do. He's Mashiach Nagid. He's the explainer. He's one like Moshe. He tells us how to walk. And we all laugh at our forefathers. Ah, ha, ha, ha. Look how silly they were in the wilderness. It's because they're just like us, brothers and sisters. So what Yeshua wants is for us to progress, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, so to speak, to climb the spiritual ladder up to biblical nationhood. And the first step is the stick of Ephraim. And once we have a stick of Ephraim, ball's in our court. Judah's already got his stick. Where's Ephraim's stick? Okay, we don't get to make up our own rules either. Okay, there's a rule set as to how we're supposed to do this. There's a rule set as to how we're supposed to walk according to the Torah of Moshe and the Tanakh, and thus move Brother Judah to jealousy. Is that why there's so few takers? It's because it's hard. It's not easy. It's a narrow and afflicted path, and few there are that find it. But those are the ones who will survive what's coming. So we have to decide what's important to us. Survival or losing everything because it's easy in the moment? Well, Yeshua says that we need to abide in him. We need to abide in his word. That means we need to do the things he says to do. We need to build on the rock and not on the sand. Okay, well, let's just take a look. We're the white horse. We're trying to separate from the red horse. Most of us are still pink horse. Some of us deep pink horse, more pink than we know. So we need to keep refining ourselves. We have basically, we talk about the wedding cycle each year, that's what it's for. The bride refines herself by the words of Torah, by the words of the wedding ketubah. She refines herself by those words, and she doesn't make up other words. She doesn't make up the works of the church fathers. She doesn't make up her own Talmud. She just does what Yeshua says. But are we doing it? Let's take a look at what Judah does. Let's take a look at, Judah is amazing. When I look at this, I started writing this list out. I'm just like, take a look at this. No wonder they're the kingship tribe. So we talked before about the Donmei, which is the infiltration of the Muslim religious apparatus. It's just amazing spy work. And the Jesuits, which complete infiltration of the Catholic Church and all the daughters of the Catholic Church. So all of your mainline Protestant churches, everyone, they're all infiltrated, all your media, everything. So then you have your Illuminati and your Masons, because if you get control of the world's money supply, Black Horse controls Red Horse, because money can influence public opinion. So here they have the Zionist Congresses of 1897, and again, there's a whole history to that, and Zero was certainly involved. And then you had the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, which is 51 years later. Okay, now, can we notice from the time Judah organized to the time Judah had a state was 51 years? And what a state they've got. They have one of the finest militaries anywhere. They are absolutely in the lead of the Genesis 35 alliance, as it should be. The Abraham Accords is perhaps the finest piece of legislation I've ever seen. That lays a physical framework for bringing Brother Ishmael in throughout the millennium, or however it works out. Judah also has a more or less unified body, if you ignore all the arguing. But brothers, what's Ephraim's kingdom fruits? What do we have? Now, I realize we were dissolved. We're just coming to ourselves. But if we're coming to ourselves, are we wanting what our husband wants? Are we wanting what our rabbi and king has asked us to do for him? Are we investing our mina truly to help establish the kingdom that he wants, trading and doing business until he comes? I've seen a lot of people into hang gliding, flying airplanes, riding horses. hiking, going to the water park, movies. Trips to Israel is fine. Are you doing the rest of your responsibilities? A lot of people excusing themselves from their responsibilities. Let's take a look. We'll just even compare. Let's look at the red horse that we're trying to separate from. Okay, and this is amazing. In the movements, there's really a strong anarchistic element to Asaph. So, and I don't know how many Messianics I've met. They're totally in favor of anarchy. And anarchy is red horse. And we talk about that in the Revelation study. So let's take a look at Asaph's kingdom fruits. He has a unified body. He's got a single point of leadership. He's got self-governance. So you could talk about a stick of Asaph, I suppose, if you wanted. He's got global political influence. He's in tight with Babylon. So they have places of worship. They have schools and colleges. They're self-perpetuating. They also have outstanding outreach services. They have food and clothing banks. They have services for the poor. They have their own hospitals. They have their own vineyards. They have their own funeral services. They have, they're involved with people. That's what they do. They serve the community. It's the wrong doctrine. It's a broad, easy road. But where's Ephraim's equivalent? Where's Ephraim's kingdom fruits, even to their own poor? Like, we don't even know who our own poor are because people don't want to organize. Of course, if they're poor, they'll volunteer to receive something free. But who's giving, brothers? Who's keeping Yeshua's commands? I mean, even if we look at Ishmael, green horse, they have a unified body, single point of leadership. I guess there's two. Of course, it's the Babylonian system. So, of course, they have two. They have Sunni and Shia. So we talk about that in the Revelation study. There's a division between the eastern and western legs. They have self-governance by nations or by organizations. They have global political influence, especially when tied with Asaph, because of the peppermint horse team. They have places of worship, schools and colleges. They have food and clothing banks. They have outreach. They have services for the poor. Where's Ephraim's kingdom fruits, brothers? Do we understand the stick of Ephraim is an interim government? And that we need to be forming an interim government, because if we don't organize, we don't get to go back home to the land. Even Ishmael's outdoing us. Even Asaph is outdoing us. Brother Judah obviously is leaving everyone in the dust. So we're going to talk about various things during this midrash. And I know there's a lot of people that they tune in for 30 minutes or so and then leave. But we're going to talk about, and I suppose, if you just want the summation, but we're going to talk about several themes in this midrash. So this Parashat Shoftim, and I want to talk primarily to Ephraim here. The Haftarah, of course, we're orienting toward Judah because Judah's cherry-picking verses to support their theology. We'll talk about that in the Haftarah section. But I don't have the words. I pray Yahweh will please help me to express what I see with regards to the house of Ephraim. And I've heard it called the peacetime mentality. I've heard it called the great omission. And people talk about love. Oh, I love Yeshua. Oh, he knows my heart. Oh, yes, because does he see your fruits? So there's a lot of people, they think that they're disciples, but where's the fruits? So we're going to talk about these things. People need to understand if we're not in the end times already, we are entering into the end times. We're waiting for the sky to recede like a scroll at seal 6. So a lot of things are going to happen in these end times. But we need to understand, because this is what it's going to take for Ephraim to become a people again. We need to learn from the Torah. Hello. We need to apply the Torah to ourselves. Hello. We need to make sure our walk conforms with the Tanakh and with the Brit Chadasha. Hello. And how many Ephraimites are complying with all of it? Because that's what Yeshua wants, because that's how Yeshua's kingdom is to be built. He gave us marching orders how to build his kingdom. How many of us are obeying those orders, and how many of us are ignoring them? figuring a worldly Babylonian voting government is going to be good enough for Yeshua, the king above all kings, that he's going to put up with a Babylonian system, that he's going to be happy with that. So Shoftim explains the principles and precepts that Levi is supposed to be teaching and maintaining inside the land of Israel. Tanakh, not Talmud. And we're comfortable saying Tanakh because if you start with Torah, you end up in Tanakh. You start with Tanakh and really study it, then you end up in the Brit Chadasha. And of course, that's why Brother Judah is not really studying his Tanakh. He's not applying it to himself. He's replacing it. Well, this parasha also explains how Torah government is to work outside the land of Israel under the order of kings and priests, under the order of Melchi-Tzedek. And brother, Ephraim needs to take this so seriously. There's just this belief set in Ephraim that we just don't need to take it seriously because we're all waiting on the rapture bus or something like that. We're waiting for Yeshua because we come again because it's a free gift. Well, it is a free gift, but it's a free opportunity to the tryouts. And we don't want to try out. We don't want to try for the gold medal. We don't want to go for gold because we figure we've already got enough. We've already made it. And so we guarantee ourselves destruction because that's the attitude that defines lukewarm. So this parasha will talk briefly about how Torah government is supposed to work in the dispersion under the order of Melchi-Tzedek. And this is how we get to come home. And we're not going to represent people who don't help to build Yeshua's kingdom. We're just not going to do that because that's contrary to what the renewed covenant says. Sorry about that. Not sorry. Shoftim also shows us that those who help to establish true Torah government will be the ones to survive. If you read the Revelation study or watch Revelation Simplified, 90% of Ephraim is going to die. 10% of us are going to survive. Because why? Because we entered into relationship with Yeshua, not just any relationship, into an obedience love relationship with Yeshua. So now we come to our Torah portion. And for a quick review, we saw before in this series that there's two different kinds of armies. There's the temporal or the physical army led by the king, or in the case of Israel, the prime minister. In the case of the United States, the president. Then you have the priest or the priesthood. So in the land of Israel, presently it's the Sanhedrin. And then we'll talk about the house of Ephraim. And then you have the prophet, who is effectively quality control. He hears Yahweh's voice and transmits it to the people, and everyone is supposed to listen, including the king and the priesthood. Kings and priests don't like prophets. You get the house of Judah as the kingship and the priesthood. Judah has always hated prophets. All the way back to Joseph, Judah has hated prophets and tried to kill them. Okay, well, then you also have the fourth special category. It's called the anointed judge, which is a special combination of all three. And this applies whenever the nation is in a change of direction. So, for example, Moshe was a judge. For example, King David effectively was a kind of a judge because he was also used to establish the tabernacle of David, which it's our job to reestablish, to stand it back up. And as we'll see, the shaliach, or the apostle, is also a special mix of all three. And there's supposed to be order in between the shaliachim. Now, just to review, before we start the Torah portion, just what we've been reading through the book of Numbers. So Israel came and struck Arad. Then we bypassed Edom, where Esau lives. And then we bypassed Moab. Then Yahweh used us to strike the Amorites. Then he used us to strike Og, king of Bashan. Then we returned back down and camped at Abel Shittim, which is Acacia Grove, which is Baal Peor. And that's where we're at. We had the tragedy at Baal Peor, and now Moshe's talking to us. So he begins this long monologue, or this long explanation. He's reiterating the Torah. It's a second telling of the Torah. So Devarim chapter 12 and verse 1, he says, when you cross over this Jordan, when you come into the land, and Yahweh drives your enemies out from before you, and you dwell in the land peacefully because you're hearing his voice and doing everything that he said. These are the statutes and judgments which you're going to need to observe carefully in the land of Israel, so that Yahweh will be pleased and will allow you to remain peaceful in the land. Our forefathers didn't do that. There was lots of mixed worship, just like there is today. Now it continues. We saw last week in Parashat Re'eh, we saw that Yahweh commands for provision for his spiritual government. So verse 16, he says, 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before Yahweh your Elohim in the place which he chooses, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or the Pesach, which is the taking of the bride, at the Feast of Weeks, which is the announcement of the wedding, the public announcement and the receiving of the Torah as the bridal marital contract, the ketubah, and then again at the end of summer at the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, which is a symbolic picture of the wedding week. It says, and they shall not appear before Yahweh empty-handed. Now, I don't know, I pray I will say this appropriately, but one hears occasionally of brides who don't really support their husbands, or they're looking to kick back and take life easy. And this isn't the way things were back in biblical times. It's an interesting phrase. Even now, we believe are biblical times because we're getting ready to enter into the time of the end. But Yahweh has always wanted his bride to be a worker. So Yahweh is a man of war. He's a war Elohim. So in ancient times, when the king went out on campaign, the king and sometimes the nobility would bring their wives with them. So, and they weren't just there to beautify the inside of the tent. As a queen or as a slave queen, a slave princess, you have a job to do. He needs his bride to be active for him. Any successful king has a successful queen helping him. So, or so the saying goes. But so what Yahweh says is, and notice he established the spiritual government before we got the physical government, the temporal government of King David, King Shaul first, and then King David. So what Yahweh established first is that we are to provide for his spiritual government. Okay. And this is what we have to do if we want to survive and if we want to go home, is we need to keep all of his commandments. And people find that outrageous, and they say, well, what do I get for my shekel? What do I get for my dollar? Well, let's take a look at the command here. Yahweh says, every man shall give as he is able. Now, why would Yahweh say that? Why would Yahweh say, every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of Yahweh your Elohim, which he has given you? So now we know that some people are poor. The story of the widow with the 2 mites, the 2 agorot. I don't know what it was, but just 2 small, worthless or low value copper coins. But she was trying to support the kingdom. And then you have many other people. I don't know how many people I've seen, just to speak the truth in love. I don't know how many people I've seen. They have second homes, they have airplanes, they have nice cars, but they have no money for Yahweh. They have retirement property. They're buying a house, and they want to establish a 401k, but they have no money for Yahweh. And you just kind of have to wonder, is that why Yeshua said, where your heart is, so there shall be your treasure also? Because what you care about, that's what you put your time and your money towards. So what are the things that we're putting our time and our money towards? And what Yahweh's saying is, if you care about me, if you care about me helping me to establish my kingdom, this is what I want you to do. I want you to help me, just like a bride, any loving bride, any bride that truly loves her husband, she's going to be right there helping him. So are we right there helping him, or are we playing the bless me club? We show up when we want something, we ask him, but do we ever ask him, what does he want us to do? And if we ever ask him, does he say, if you love me, keep all of my commandments? Because I don't want to hate you. I don't want to consider you lukewarm. I don't want to consider you a Babylonian who's pretending to worship me when you're really not. I want you to show your love for me. I want you to show fruits worthy of repentance. So, what is a fruit worthy of repentance for a bride? Well, if someone loves Yahweh, aren't they going to give as much as they can to help establish his kingdom? And not just money, also time. Isn't that going to be their focus? Or is their focus the movies, Netflix, football? I asked a pastor one time, I said, what's your passion? He said, football. Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Not the kingdom, football. Messianic pastor. Well, what do you get for your shekel? What do you get for your dollar? Okay, what are you supposed to get for your shekel? What are you supposed to get for your dollar? Well, Yahweh says here in chapter 16 and in verse 18, he says, I'm going to give you Torah government by which you shall be consoled and comforted, because you will dwell safely and securely and in an orderly fashion inside the land. And when I walk among the camp, I'll be happy with you. So you will dwell in the land peacefully because you heard my voice in this, and then you obeyed what got written down by Moshe the prophet, who heard his voice and wrote it down. He says, you shall appoint judges and officers in all your gates. And well, Judah's got some kind of government, not exactly that. Judah doesn't have the Levitical order exactly yet. Ephraim's got his own problems. Ephraim needs to organize his own backyard and his own neighborhood and his own communities first. Ephraim needs to form his own nation first. Ephraim needs to form a stick first. And part of that is appointing judges and officers in all of our gates. That's one of the commandments right there. Okay, and we're going to see the renewed covenant applications when we get to the Brit Chadasha section. And this is what we have to do if we want to live. So what are they supposed to do? What are these judges and officers that are not anointed, but appointed? What's the difference? An anointed judge is selected by Yahweh. An appointed judge is selected by the leadership of the nation. So verse 20 says, and you shall teach them the statutes and the laws that Yahweh says, not making up your own, but the ones Yahweh gives, and show them the way in which they must walk and the work they must do. Now, Judah understands the work they must do. That's why Judah has so many fruits. Does Ephraim understand the principle and the precept is that there's work to do? Because you could be called up for the temporal army, but if you're not being called up for the temporal army, you're supposed to be helping the priesthood further the spiritual army worldwide. Okay, but you got to organize yourselves and be orderly, because Yahweh is an Elohim of order, as in all the assemblies of the saints. That's why verse 21 says, moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, means they know what they're doing, such as fear Elohim, which means you're keeping all of his commandments eagerly because that's what you want to do. If you don't want to keep all of Yahweh's commandments, then you don't fear Elohim, and you're going to be cut in two. So repent. They need to be men of truth. King David tells us the Torah is truth. The written Torah of Moshe is truth. They need to be men of Torah. They need to understand what the Torah says. They need to understand the kingdom building purpose. And they need to help implement it. When they know what the Torah says and can counsel people, they will be men of truth that can fulfill this function. They should hate covetousness, because, like it or not, someone's in a decision-making capacity, and there's always a bribe crouching by the door. with your name on it, but you should rule over it. If you can find men like this, if you can find men, they obey Elohim, they do everything he says, they're afraid to disobey his word, they're men who keep the whole Torah of Moshe. If you do that, you'll end up following Mashiach Nagid. They hate covetousness. They don't want bribes. They don't want nothing like that. If you can find that kind of man, then place that kind of man to be a ruler over thousands, and then over hundreds, over 50s, and rulers of tens. And brothers, I'm so sorry to say, I don't know how many times I've had people say, appoint 10 men. And I'm sorry to say this, but my answer has to be, who? Who do we have in the house of Ephraim who fears Elohim and keeps his whole Torah? Who do we have in the house of Ephraim who teaches the whole Torah of Moshe? Who do we have in the house of Ephraim who's not a book merchant making merchandise in the house of Elohim because there's a lot of money in it? Okay, who do we have, brothers? We have a few disciples in Nazarene Israel who are trying to keep everything in the written Torah and the Tanakh and the Brit Chadasha. Who else do we have? Forgive me for asking. So, come to chapter 17 and verse 2. He says, if there's found among you within any of your gates, which Yahweh or Elohim gives you, a man or a woman who has been wicked in the sight of Yahweh or Elohim in transgressing his covenant, who has gone and served other Elohim, and the word serve, that just means basically pay attention to, in the sense of factor it in, give it credence of any kind, whether it's a cross on the wall or a Star of David or a hexagram, really is what it is, on a flag, or the cross of Tammuz, the menorah fish, the Dagon fish. Okay, if you serve, if you take any of those things into account, if you put them on your clothing, you put them on your flag, you put them on your wall, Elohim will consider that you have served them and worshiped them because you paid attention to them rather than him. And he doesn't care whether we're talking about the sun or the moon or any of the hosts of the heaven, because he's not commanded that kind of worship. Verse 4, he says, and if it's told to you and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently. And if it is indeed true and certain that such an abomination has been committed in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates that man or that woman who has committed that wicked thing, and shall stone to death that man or woman with stones. Now, that's when we live inside the land of Israel with the Torah Moshe as our constitution. That's when that applies. If you're outside the land of Israel in the dispersion under the order of Melchi-Tzedek, this does not apply. The same principles and precepts apply. We'll see those show up in Acts chapter 15. But we don't take physical action in the dispersion. Our job is only attraction. But in order to gain traction with attraction, you've got to have organization. Okay, but you also have to have purity. And I don't know how many messianic organizations, the movement, what was it? What did they call that? Agree to disagree on doctrine. Is that what Yeshua did? He agreed to disagree. Or there's the doctrine that you can't really tell what the renewed covenant says. It's not possible to define that message, even though Shaul tells us that all scripture is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, and so that the man of Elohim might be thoroughly equipped for every good work. Okay, but no, we don't want to do that. We don't think you can know what the true doctrine is. We don't think you can have a correct doctrine. Therefore, we have to be Babylonian and democratic about it. Father forbid. So you want to talk about moon worship? You can take a look at, it's called the Lunar Sabbath Error. I forget which book probably Torah Government. If it's not in Torah Government, it's in one of the Nazarene Scripture Studies series. It's a long study. It's still accurate. I'd like to add a few more things to it, but it's the clearest example of moon worship. I mean, you can't tell. So this is service to the moon. That's what this is. You're taking the moon into account in any. So we're still, oh yeah, no, we're having a Sabbath, and, and the numbers just don't work. So anyway, check that study out. That's moon worship. Another thing, it's worship of the host of the heaven, the sun, the moon, the stars, is the equinox. And you see this all the time. We have a study, it's both video and written. Where is the equinox commanded? Also, where is spring commanded? The word spring as such, as in season of the year, doesn't even exist in Scripture. In Scripture, you have summer and winter, period. Scripture does not talk about the equilux or the equinox or when the day and night are of equal length. It doesn't talk about that. That's a, guess it what, Babylonian concept. First appeared in Babylon, became popularized later by Greece. So then if you want to see where the Messianic movement takes their lead off of the Karaites, who use the Talmud to justify their doctrine, we have a study, Josephus, the Talmud, and the Omer. And the Talmud justifies worship of the sun and the moon and the stars, as we will see. So again, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Orthodox rabbis in the Talmud and the Karaites. Now, we love Judah. Judah good, Talmud bad. We're going to take a look at some Talmud here. This is from Wikipedia. There's a Jewish, Orthodox Jewish Talmudic blessing called Birchat Hahama. This is the blessing of the sun. And again, this is Wikipedia. It says it refers to a rare, it's not so rare, they say it every 28 years, a rare Jewish blessing that is recited to the Creator, thanking Elohim or God for creating the sun. That's not service. The blessing is recited when the sun completes its cycle every 28 years on a Tuesday at sundown. Don't be late. Jewish tradition says that when the sun completes this cycle, it has returned to its position when the world was created. Joke. Because the blessing needs to be said when the sun is visible. Oh, visible. I see. We have to look at the sun. We have to worship to the sun. We have to pray to the sun, pray in the direction of the sun. The blessing is then postponed to the following day, which is a Wednesday morning. That's not service. That's not worship. That's not adding to the Torah commandments. That's not a direct violation of what Yahweh just said in Deuteronomy. So continuing in the article, according to Judaism, Talmudic Judaism, the sun has a 28-year solar cycle known as Machzor Gadol, or the Great Cycle. Find that in Scripture. A solar year is estimated as 365.25 days, and the blessing of the sun being said at the beginning of this cycle is thus recited every 10,227 days, which is 28 times their fixed average of 365.25 days, which is not accurate, plus the fact that the orbits are not perfectly circular. The orbits are elliptical and they change and they can be skewed somewhat depending upon all these other gravitational forces that pull in different directions. So, of course, it's not always exactly the same, which is why sometimes you have a supermoon and sometimes you have a faraway moon. So it says the last time it was recited was on April the 8th, 2009, or 14 Nisan 5769 on the Jewish Hillel II Hebrew calendar. So it says, from an astronomical point of view, there is nothing special to these dates. In other words, the sun, the moon, planets, and stars will not be aligned in any specific pattern. So what is really happening besides Judah is finding an excuse to worship the sun, the moon, and the stars? That's not what's happening here. Let's take a look at the Talmud. So we come to Sefaria website, Talmud Tractate Berachot 59b. So that's the backside of the 59th page or 59th leaf, paragraph 1, I think. It says, the sages taught, one who sees the sun in the beginning of its cycle, the moon in its might, the planets in their orbit, or the signs of the zodiac aligned in their order, recites the following blessing. Blessed, author of creation, etc., yada, yada. That's not sun worship. Says the Gemara asks, and when is it that the sun is at the beginning of its cycle? Abaye said, every 28 years, when the cycle is complete and returns to its genesis or its starting point. And I think it says, and the vernal equinox is seen in the month of Nisan, or the first month, if they're counting it that way, because usually their Rosh Hashanah is in the fall, which another word that doesn't exist in Scripture, at the end of summer, at the equinox, when the spring days and nights are of equal length. Equinox, equilux, it's the same thing. Oh, and this falls within the constellation of Saturn. There's that planet again. Seventh planet from the sun, Saturn, with a hexagonal polar cap, I believe it is, on the third night of the week, on the night of the third and the eve of the fourth day of the week. And then their arrangement returns to be as it was when the constellations were first placed in the heavens, which is not correct. It's not accurate. That's not truth. That's a lie. But if you're Orthodox Jewish, you must accept it as the truth because it's the Holy Talmud. In Orthodox Judaism, it's considered more set apart than the Tanakh itself. Well, here we have the Birchat Hahama at the Western Wall in 2009. So thousands of people there. Here we have the blessing of the sun in Kafar Maimon on the same date. I don't believe that's an Asherah pole. That's probably just a utility pole of some kind, but they're looking at the sun. Could be related. Here's the sunrise of Birchat Hahama in Bel Air, California. Now, Brother Levy, I would like to ask you, please, respectfully, what is the difference between this and an Easter sunrise service held by Trinitarian Christians, basically sons and daughters of Esau, in the Baptist Church in 2007? Yours only happens once every 28 years, whereas theirs happens once a year. What's other than that? What's the difference? Really? Are either one of them commanded? Are either one of them, the Tanakh says anywhere that you can do that, when Yahweh says not to do that, lest he destroy you suddenly? What's the difference? Oh, this is a Jewish sun. We got Jewish lenses on. Oh, and this is a Christian sun. This is a Josephite, lost pink horse Joseph sunrise. Other than that, what's the difference, really? The functional difference. Well, Levi, we come to Devarim chapter 17, starting at verse 8, and it says, if any matter arises, which is too hard for you to judge, okay, you don't know, just have to get backup, between degrees of guilt for bloodshed, between one judgment or another, or between one punishment or another, matters of controversy within your gates, then you shall arise and go up to the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses, which is again Jerusalem, except we're not under the order of Levi at the minute. So if you're under the order of Levi, it's Jerusalem. If you're under the order of kings and priests, we're not in the land yet. Okay, but when we're in the land, when everything comes together, Yahweh brings us home after Armageddon, then if we have any kind of a question like that, the principle is you shall come to the priests, come to the priesthood. So come to the priests and the Levites or to the judge, like Shemuel, that is there in those days, and inquire of them, and they shall tell you what it says. Because if you're a prophet like Shemuel, you're hearing the voice and speaking according to it. If you're a Levite, you're supposed to be reading the words of the voice of Yahweh as written down by Moshe. Okay, so that's why the Levites are supposed to have their authorities, because they're pronouncing judgment according to the written Torah of Moshe. It's not that they're demigods and they can do what they want now. That's not it. That's the papal model. Seriously, them and the Baptists. But verse 10 says, you shall do according to the sentence which they pronounce upon you in that place which Yahweh chooses. But that's based or predicated on the concept that the Levites are going to be reading from the Torah of Moshe, or what later became the Tanakh, and not rewriting the standards, not coming up with the Talmud and substituting it in. Okay, because that's why you shall be ordered to do according to all that they order you, is because they're supposed to be experts in walking out the Torah of Moshe. That's their job, or one main part of their job. So for a renewed covenant example, this is what we spoke about in Acts chapter 15 in Parashat Shoftim. So when there was a dispute, Shaul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with the Messianic Jews, with the one house Messianic Jews, who said you have to obey rabbinic authority or you're going to hell, basically. It says they determined that Shaul and Barnabas and certain others of them should do what? Should go up to Jerusalem. The temple was still standing in those days, to the apostles and elders, going to the Nazarene council, not to the Pharisees, not to the Sadducees, going to the Nazarene council, the Nazarene foundation of apostles and elders, about this question. And we saw before in Akev that they walked for some approximate 2.5, 3 weeks, plus pit stops, to get up to Jerusalem to meet with the council, so that there could be only one judgment and only one body of Mashiach. Because the way Yahweh looks at things, I mean, the world counts your nationhood where you're born. So you're born in the United States, you're a United States citizen. So they call you an American. If you're born in the land of Israel, then you're born as an Israeli, no matter what you believe, no matter how you practice, no matter whether you're in favor of the Torah or Tanakh or Satanism or what you believe, Talmud. So there has to be one single point of ruling. There has to be one single code, law code. This is why I've been working on law code since 5760 or 2000, is because it was very obvious that at some point the movement is going to come together, and Ephraim and Judah are going to come together, and that's going to have to be based on Yahweh's words and not made up words of our own. Or how are we his disciples? How are we his taught ones? Well, the original idea, if Levi had continued in the Torah Moshe, or in what later became the Tanakh, chapter 17 and verse 11 says, according to the sentence of the written Torah of Moshe, in which they instruct you, not Talmud, written Torah of Moshe, according to the judgment which they tell you, you shall do, because it's what Elohim commanded. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or the left from the sentence which they pronounce upon you, because they're focusing on Yahweh's words, not on their own words in Talmud. Verse 12, assuming Levi is focused on Yahweh's words, the man who acts presumptuously and will not heed the priest who stands to minister Yahweh's words there before Yahweh or Elohim, or who won't listen to the judge who's hearing Yahweh's voice and speaking according to it, because he has the gift of a prophet. He's an anointed judge. By definition, he can hear the voice. If you're not going to listen to the written words of Moshe, and if you're not going to listen to the words of a true prophet of Yahweh, that man shall die, because he's not helping to build the kingdom. So you shall put away the lazy, evil people from Israel, because they're here to live off of Yahweh's largesse and his longness of nose, his patience. They're not trying to help him, so they're not worthy to live in the land of Israel. Verse 13, and all the people shall hear and fear and no longer act presumptuously. That means you figure you don't need to obey Yahweh. What do you need to obey Yahweh for? Maybe you'll read Yahweh, but you're not going to obey Yahweh. You're going to make up your Talmud. You're going to make up your church fathers. You're just going to sit there, read, and do nothing, like most of the house of Ephraim. Well, Yeshua spoke about this in Matthew chapter 23, starting in verse 1. So Yeshua spoke to the multitudes, public preaching, and to his disciples, private teaching also, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moshe's seat. Today, that's the Karaites and the rabbis, the Talmudists. Therefore, okay, now what is Moshe's seat? We'll talk about that. Most people know, but we'll talk about it for those who are new to this. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. So what we're really saying here is, well, first let's look at this. So many people know already there was a special seat that you would sit in back in those days, and then you would read from the written Torah of Moshe. It's kind of like the same as having a big Bible in the pulpit, and the preacher stands up in front of the congregation. And what Yeshua is really saying is, when he's reading to you from Elohim's words, whether it's a Torah scroll, a Haftarah scroll, or whether it's renewed covenant, when you're hearing the words of Elohim, do those. If he's a hypocrite, if he's following Zugot pairs, or he's following Talmud, or he's following the Trinity, he's following the church fathers, he's doing something other than exactly what Elohim said to do, he's going to do wrong works. Don't worry about those. Worry about obeying the words of Elohim that he's reading to you. That's what Yeshua is truly saying. What Yahweh is saying is, these are the words Yahweh wants us to read to the people, because there's extreme temptations, both on priests and on kings and on the people. There's temptations to do the wrong thing. So we need to teach Yahweh's words and not our own interpretations of Yahweh's words. We should go straight to the source. So speaking of the kingship, he says, when you come to the land which Yahweh or Elohim is giving you and possess it and dwell in it, and you say, I will set a king over me. Okay, now it's not a problem to have a king. Yahweh always said that we would have a king. But here's the problem. When we say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, okay, when I want to make Aliyah to Israel and vote in a democratic mystery Babylonian government, when I want to vote for Trump, vote for Biden, vote for Harris, vote for whoever, okay, that's participating in a wrong system. And that is facilitated because people aren't paying attention to Yahweh's words. People are paying attention to their own opinions of Yahweh's words, and they might read Yahweh's words, but they don't want it to apply to them, because under Yahweh's instructions, we have responsibilities and duties to each other. Under Yahweh's instructions, we're helping to establish a nation according to his pattern. We're not just getting something for ourselves. We're not just voting for what we want. It's a totally different thought process. It's a totally different system. What he didn't want was for us to have a king over us like all the other nations that are around us. But that's what we have in the land of Israel. That's what we have in the United States. That's what we have in all of the democratic countries, is we have a mystery Babylonian government, and that's prohibited. Verse 15, he says, don't do that. Rather, you shall surely set a king over you whom Yahweh your Elohim chooses. Okay, how are we going to know that? Will it be someone who hears and obeys his voice? And just to be clear, I don't need to run it, but who do we have doing this? Who, seriously, brothers, if we need to organize and go back home, if we need to organize in order to live so we can go back home, then we need to be keeping all of his commandments. Then let's take a look at this. What is the principle? What's the precept here? The principle and the precept is we're waiting for Yahweh to indicate his leader of the nation. That's true in the era of judges. That's true in the era of kings, although a king would start a dynastic line. And it's absolutely true in the order of kings and priests. We need to be not picking out pastors for ourselves. We need to be not picking out rabbis for ourselves. We're not church shopping. We're not synagogue hopping. We're making a commitment to Yahweh Elohim. So this is the principle for in the land. What kind of leader do we want? Do we want prosperity gospel ministers who multiply horses for themselves? Verse 16 says, he shall not multiply horses for himself. Now, in context, horses are in the temporal realm are typically war horses. So he shall not focus on having an extremely large and powerful government, because if he's obeying Yahweh, he doesn't need to spend all that money on an extremely powerful mystery Babylonian military. So he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. So don't go back to the world system, which is practiced both in the land of Israel and in the United States and in the other Western democratic countries. For Yahweh has said to you, you shall not return that worldly way to Egypt again. And where did both houses go? Ishmael, well, we'll talk about Ishmael at a different time. Verse 17, neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself. And just to mention it, these are all things that King Solomon did. Everything King Solomon did was prohibited. So basically, as good as David was, King Solomon undid those things, and then it reflected also with his son, King Rehoboam. Verse 18, also it shall be when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, now Levi, this is for you, that he shall write for himself a copy of this written Torah in a book. Okay, this is not the Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is not the oral Torah. He's talking about a written Torah. Yahweh is saying through Moshe, he's saying a king. Okay, if you're in charge of the temporal realm, you're in charge of lawyers, guns, and money, you're supposed to make for yourself a copy of the Torah Moshe in a book from the one before the priests or the Levites. So you're getting Yahweh's straight word. Okay, you're not hearing it through filtered, you're not hearing just getting Yahweh's straight word. And it shall be with him, he shall keep it with him, and he shall read it, Yahweh's word, all the days of his life. This is something for the President of the United States. This is something for the Prime Minister of Israel. This is something for any Western democratic leader anywhere. Should be reading the words of Yahweh, should be hearing the voice. If you can't hear the voice, at least read the words and obey all of them. Read from it every day of your life, that we may learn to fear Yahweh, that the king may learn to fear Yahweh, his Elohim, and be careful to observe all the words of this written Torah of Moshe and these statutes which Yahweh commanded through Moshe, not to make up a Talmud, not to make up church fathers, not to read it and do nothing, but to be careful to observe all the words. And this is for Ephraim. Judah has no problem being active, of course, at the wrong thing. Ephraim knows what the right thing is. Once again, he just isn't taking action. So, brothers, we need to pray very seriously for our people that the 10% that is supposed to wake up will wake up, because we have to wake up if we want to survive what's coming. We have to show fruit. We have to bear fruit worthy of repentance, that we're not focused on the world around us. We're not focused on material goods and things. We're not focused on wasting time at trivial pursuits, but that our focus is on the kingdom, that we seek first the kingdom. And continuing in verse 20, the reason the king is not supposed to focus on pleasures of the flesh, not supposed to focus on his ego, not supposed to trust in lots of money or in a big military, is so that his heart might not be lifted up above his brethren, thinking he's superior to his brethren, like King Solomon whipped the house of Joseph, like King Rehoboam threatened to scourge the house of Joseph, because he thinks of himself as more than his brethren, and Joseph is just a B'nai Noach slave. That his heart may not be lifted up like that, so that he may not turn aside from Yahweh's commandment to the right hand or to the left, that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. And when we don't do that, Mr. Prime Minister, we don't do that, Mr. President, we are not in his favor. Generic president and prime minister. Chapter 18 and verse 1. The priests, the Levites, all the tribe of Levi, the spiritual army, shall have no part nor inheritance with Israel, because they're not supposed to be focused on this realm. They're supposed to be focused on our Father above. So they have no part nor physical inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of Yahweh made by fire, and his portion. So there's your principle and precept. The people are supposed to support their standing priesthood in representing them to their Elohim, so that their Elohim will accept their peace offerings, their love offerings, their tithes, their sacrifices and offerings. That's one reason why they have no inheritance among their brethren, is because their focus and their care is to be on Yahweh and the things of Elohim, as he said to them. Come down to verse 9. Again, it says, when you come into the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or any art, any craft in which the spirit realm is consulted other than Yahweh. Because basically what you're doing is you're consulting the fallen watchers, is what you're doing. Verse 11. Not supposed to consult anyone who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who, get this, calls up the dead. We're going to talk about Judah's actions at the Chabad headquarters in just a moment. For all who do these things are an abomination to Yahweh. And because of these abominations, because of these spiritual consults in the demonic realm, rather than focusing on the light, rather than focusing on Yahweh and his word, these abominations, Yahweh or Elohim drives them out from before you. So the Hittites, the Perizzites, etc., they were practicing these abominations. So Yahweh doesn't want us practicing these abominations. So what does Judah do? This is Chabad, which actually is Zerah. And as we saw before, they admitted that they were performing Tibetan Book of the Dead, Book of Living and Dying rituals on blood-stained mattresses, 4 of them, down below the Chabad headquarters. And they give us this argument that everything is kosher, everything is good, because it's it's Levi, it's Zerah. He can do what he wants. He has an anointing to do whatever he wants. He doesn't need to obey the written Torah of Moshe. He can do whatever he wants because he's Levi or Zerah. But he's special, you see. He's above Yahweh's law. He's immune. He's exempt from Yahweh's law because according to Judaism, Yahweh gave the house of Judah the authority to establish their own Torah in each generation, which is the opposite of what he says, which is that we're supposed to maintain his Torah always. That's what he says. Good old Chabad.org. What I didn't find in a Tibetan monastery, I found at the Chabad, because Orthodox Judah is major league syncretists. They make up their own thing. They start with a base of Yahweh's Torah, and then they just modify it to suit. So it's no longer Yahweh's Torah, but their own mixture, their own syncretic thing. Is Buddhism kosher? Chabad.org. Unbelievable. Just to refresh, this is the attitude in the house of Judah. This is direct violation of what Yahweh is commanding in Devarim. So Chabad.org, Zerah.org says, you will find throughout our people's history a process by which some elements of an alien culture are adopted, syncretized, while others are rejected. Not a very formalized process because we do whatever we want, however we want, because we're Judah. We can do what we want. The rules are rather vague and tenuous because we do whatever we want. But nonetheless, they're nevertheless successful in avoiding the syncretism because they say so, that has dissolved other cultures while imbibing all that is good from the world around us. So Judah takes what they want, however they want. They violate Yahweh's written Torah of Moshe however they want, and they just say it's not syncretism because they say so. And who would know better than them? Because after all, they're the kingship and the priestly tribe, and they hate prophets, so they don't want to hear about it. So we read about it in the comments section each week. Article continues, you will find distinct traces of ancient Egypt or the world system, Babylonia, of course, because the rabbinical order dwells in Babylon, because that's the head of gold. So the kingship tribe, lawyers, guns, and money. So Babylonian. Athens, that's Greece. That's the belly and thighs of bronze. Rome, that's the legs of iron. Persia, Iran. So you're back up to the Media Persia. That's the chest and arms of silver. Cordoba, Istanbul, because of the Donme. Florence, and every other civilization in which Jews have lived, because they're major league penetrators. They're the kingship tribe. This is the process that we're in. We talk about that in other places. They're busy doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then here's the lie. But you'll only find those aspects which are in confluence with the body and soul of Torah as defined by Orthodox Judah, which is Talmudism, not Tanakh. That's the whole problem right there. That was the whole fight. That was the whole argument back in the first century. Is you need to obey Elohim's words, not your own words. So, major frontrunner, lead thinker Yuval Harari, in his book Ancient Jewish Magic, he says the comments of the Ben Ish Hai, this is from his book, are echoed by scholars of Babylonian Jewry, in Babylon dwelling in the head of gold, who observe the prevalence of magical and esoteric beliefs among the Jews of Babylon dating back to Talmudic times as discussed above. Okay, so magic in the Talmud. Jacob Neusner claims, were an anthropologist of our times to spend a few years in ancient Pumbedita, Sura, or Nahardia in Babylon in order to learn the social role of what Judaism calls the sage, which is the Torah replacer, the Talmudist, the lead Talmudist, his research work would certainly have a title like the legislating sorcerer of Babylon, because Judah practices sorcery. And isn't that just exactly what Yahweh said not to do? Chapter 18, verse 13, Yahweh says, you shall be blameless before Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not dabble in the black arts and crafts. You shall not enter the spirit realm any other way. You shall not pay attention to these evil demonic entities and their promises. For these nations which you dispossess, these nations which I'm using you to kick out, to eliminate, to wipe out, they listened to soothsayers and diviners. So as for you, Yahweh your Elohim has not appointed such for you. You're not supposed to enter the spirit realm except through the correct door. So 18 and verse 15, he says, Yahweh your Elohim will raise up for you a prophet like me, one like Moshe, from your midst, from among your brethren. Yahweh says, him you shall hear. Now, brother Judah, this is the commandment. Again, is your focus on the word of Elohim, or is your focus on your own word? It says, him you shall hear. We know he came at the end of the Second Temple period. Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 and 26, after the 62 weeks, which are in the Second Temple era, Mashiach Nagid shall be cut off, but not for himself. So we know that he had to be killed before the end of the Second Temple period, before the city was destroyed. So we know this, that the city and the sanctuary were destroyed in 3830 or 70 CE. So he is Mashiach Nagid. He is one like Moshe, who was sent to show us the way. Mashiach Nagid, Mashiach the director, Mashiach the teller, Mashiach the one who indicates the way, Mashiach the one who shows us the way to walk like Moshe walked, applying it to our cases today. Verse 16, he says, according to all that you desired of Yahweh your Elohim in Horeb, Mount Sinai, in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of Yahweh my Elohim, nor let me see this great fire anymore, lest I die. Okay. I can't talk with Yahweh. I'm too scared. If I go talk with Yahweh, I see this fire, I'm going to die. So please, you go talk with him. Give us a human to talk with him. We'll listen to the human. There's the lie. Our forefathers said they would listen to the human intermediary, and we don't. That's the whole problem. That's what Yeshua came to address in the first century. Verse 17, and Yahweh said to me, what they've spoken is good. Verse 18, I will raise up for them a prophet like you, one like Moshe, from among their brethren. He says, and I will put my words in his mouth. That's exactly what Yeshua claimed. And he says, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And that's what Yeshua claimed. And that's why Yeshua said not to think anything had fallen from the Torah of Moshe, because the Torah of Moshe witnesses of him. So we know that anyone who breaks the Torah of Moshe is guilty of death in the land under a cleansed regime, when the Torah is our constitution. If we don't obey the Torah of Moshe when we live in the land under a Levitical ordering structure, then we're worthy of death if we disobey any of the commandments. So verse 19, what did Yeshua say? So Yahweh says, and it shall be that whoever will not hear my words, which Mashiach Nagid was going to speak in his name, because he's his representative, he says, I will require it of him. Require what? Death. Death penalty for breaking the Torah of Moshe, because we're not listening to Mashiach Nagid. That's when we live in the land of Israel. That's not for dispersion. And praise Yahweh, we love brother Judah. Unlike Esav, we pray for brother Judah. Unlike brother Judah, we pray for other sons of Yaakov. Verse 20, he says, but the prophet who presumes to speak a word, there's that word again, presumes. That's like the word assume. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other Elohim, that prophet shall die. So if you're not going to listen to Mashiach Nagid, but you're going to listen to someone else, or if you're going to speak in the name of the Lord, or Baal, or Hashem, or Adonai, that is not Yahweh's name. That prophet, Yahweh says, shall die. We have nothing to do, well, hopefully, we don't want to be the agent of punishment. That's not a good role. We want to pray for Judah and Levi and Benjamin and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Verse 21, and if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which Yahweh has not spoken? Now, Brother Judah has a big problem with this. We're going to talk about it. He says, when a prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which Yahweh has not spoken. Meaning the prophet has spoken it presumptuously. He presumed, he took it upon himself. He assumed it would be okay to speak his own words. Don't be afraid of him. He's not speaking my words. He's speaking according to his own presumption. It helps to be able to hear his voice. But with regard to that, have you ever just heard the saying, something just don't sound right? Either it sounds good, sounds right, or just doesn't sound right. Well, Judah gives their reasons why they reject Yeshua. So this is from Wikipedia about the rejection of Jesus. So it says, Judaism affirms that Jesus did not fulfill the messianic prophecies by ushering in an era of universal peace, citing Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 4, because it wasn't time yet. So Yeshua also didn't build the third temple, citation Ezekiel 37, 26 through 28, because we're not supposed to have anything to do with the third temple. The third temple is the Talmudic temple. So we're sitting that one out. We're waiting until the fourth temple, which will be the real temple of Yehezkel. He says Yeshua also didn't gather all the Jews back to the land of Israel, in keeping with Yeshayahu 43, verses 5 and 6. Again, it's not time yet. So people, I believe, don't understand just how bad of a fall we took when we decided not to obey the Torah. So, and partial keeping of the Torah, or replacement theology keeping of the Torah, doesn't please Elohim. It doesn't make him happy. So it's like the same thing when we left Egypt. When we left Egypt, we could have gone to the land of Israel in 2 or 3 weeks. Same kind of a thing, but we didn't want to obey his standards. So we had to spend 40 years in what could have taken 2 or 3 weeks. So it's the same kind of a thing. We had the opportunity in Acts chapter 15 to do things the right way and not have a great falling away. But of course, we had a great falling away. So we are taking the long route, the scenic route, the troublesome route, the tribulation route, the time of Jacob's trouble route. This is from the study on Revelation in the End Times, or Revelation Simplified on YouTube. Once again, we're at Seal 6. I don't know if Ephraim has really thought about all that is coming up here. When I think about all this, there is so much destruction coming. And this is why we're going to see a 90% death rate in Ephraim, a 10% survival rate, those who truly want to keep all of his commandments. So please pray for our 10%. Judah, I believe the death rate is supposed to be higher than that, but Judah will survive in the land, and Joseph has to merge together with Judah. It's a long process. We can talk about it in more detail in upcoming parashiot, because in these end times here in Devarim, or in these end times, let's notice that in Devarim, Moshe is talking about forming a government. So it's the same thing. So in order to keep Torah, the Ephraimites are always saying, I keep Torah, I keep Torah. No, you don't. Not if you're not helping to establish Yeshua's kingdom. Not if you're not helping to further the kingdom of Elohim. We talked about, again, Judah's got a concept of the kingdom. And they're doing some important, very important work. Esau has a concept, his concept of the kingdom, but he's lazy. So, and then you have Ishmael, who has his concept of the kingdom, and we'll talk about Ishmael in other places. But here we are again. We're not waiting on the tribulation yet. We're waiting on the sky receding like a scroll at seal 6, then a half hour of silence in heaven. That's 20 years and 10 months, during which the 144,000 will be sealed. Then you have the 7 years of tribulation. Last half is Jacob's trouble, and then you have Armageddon. Then you get to the ingathering. That's when the two sticks truly come together. But there's preparatory work, just like Judah had to begin 51 years in advance, brothers. And think about it. Like, if it took Judah 51 years from the time they started to organize to the time they were able to go back home to the land, what about Ephraim? Brothers, how long is it going to take us to organize, as Yahweh says, especially now that the ball is in our court? So let's come back and take a look again at verses 21, 22. And it says, if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which Yahweh has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that's the thing which Yahweh has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. But everything Yeshua said came true. So if anyone has any specific comments as to where, respectful comments as to where, if we could clarify something for someone, what did Yeshua say that did not happen or come to pass? And what did Yeshua say, properly interpreted, that did away with the Torah when he said not to think that? And there's many verses where the Torahless ones will be outside where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So we're talking again about the 10% of Ephraim that's going to come home, and the 90% of Ephraim that's going to stay in Esav, is not going to differentiate fully and completely from Esav, that their dress is still tainted pink. So clean white garment for Joseph, not something tainted pink. So if anyone can tell us what Yeshua spoke presumptuously, according to the Brit Chadasha, now the Talmud, we're not going to take responsibility for the statements in Talmud. Those are made up. But if anyone can show us from the Brit Chadasha, properly interpreted, not your take on it, not what you think it says, what it actually says, not what you'd like it to say. I speak with Orthodox and they misquote stuff. It was, again, today I got another misquote. We want to proceed from here to our Haftarah portion, because we're talking in context about the establishment or the reestablishment of government, Torah government, for the house of Joseph. We're also talking about what will be happening with Judah in the land of Israel in these end times. And once again, there is a contingent of Judah that sojourns with Joseph. There's also a contingent of Joseph or Israel that sojourns with Judah. So we just have to recognize things for what they are. So let's come to our Haftarah prophetic portion. And once again, so we are in, Judah has some traditions surrounding the temple, and we talk about service and not factoring in anything that Yahweh doesn't say into our equation, into our thinking. And Judah has a lot of traditions around the second temple. So to be respectful, to speak the truth in love. Again, I think sometimes of Job, because Elihu was a young man and he didn't want to declare his opinion at first. So Ephraim is young compared to Judah in many respects. So for one thing, Ephraim, I'm not sure what you are, your brother's son, and then you are our uncle. So you are older than we are. You've been at this a lot longer than we have. You've been focusing on Elohim for, depending on how you count, for 3,000 or 3,500 years. And we were gone for more than 70% of that time. So we are just now coming back. We are just now reforming. We're just now helping our brethren to understand the importance of fulfilling the requirements of biblical nationhood, which is to obey everything that's in the Torah, not just the easy parts. So, our forefathers left 2,730 plus years ago, and we are just now coming back. I didn't really feel it was appropriate for me to start mouthing off and wagging the tongue. When we first started this series back in Parashat Vayeshev, we shared some very, how shall we say, some cycles of abuse that take place from elder to younger, from the older brother Judah and Levi toward the younger brother Joseph. And then we shared some prophecies. And Ephraim, I'm really so glad that things have improved, because Ephraim was pretty much wagging the tongue in those early sessions. And praise Yahweh, that seems to have quieted down. And now we have an increasing number of people who are interested in hearing about what was the original first century faith. How do we survive the tribulation? How do we please our Elohim in the day of judgment? And the answer to that is hear Yahweh's voice, do everything it says, including all of the things Elohim is ever recorded as saying through the Spirit or through Yeshua or through Yahweh speaking through prophet. So every time Elohim speaks, that is inspired scripture. That is from our commander and king. It's not optional. The Great Commission is not optional. But with regards to Judah, I just didn't really feel it was appropriate until after the whole Mashiach ben Yosef incident, when they hijacked my computer. I realized we're going to have to formulate a proper response to this as a house, as a stick. So we'll talk more about that. Yahweh gave me some things to relate, but we need to finish this series first. So let's come back to zera.org, Chabad.org. In this Haftarah series, we have Judah's, how shall we say, Judah's man-made tradition, again, revolving around the Second Temple. So there's this sort of this cult of Second Temple. There's this cult of the works of men. So anytime men's works are done, they get exalted in the house of Judah. And again, Ephraim has his own problems. So praise Yahweh, the comments are much more tame. And we ask for loving comments and prayers for Judah. Judah is our brother. There's a lot of Joseph that's still got one foot in the house of Esau, still got a few toes in that pool, and we need to come clean. We can't be tainted pink, or we won't. I will not support. I realize this will be tremendously unpopular. I will not support Pink Horse coming home. We will not do it. It is contrary to Mashiach's will. He can justify he can speak to his father, whom he wants, but that's Elohim's job, not our job. Our job is to obey his instructions. So we're not in the land of Israel under a cleansed Levitical order. So we're not under the Levitical order. We just take the principles and precepts of the Levitical order. We are under the order of kings and priests, the order of Melchi-Tzedek. So Yeshua gives us specific instructions to follow while we're in the order of Melchi-Tzedek, and we're praying for the 10% that want to survive enough and who love Yeshua enough to do what he says. So Coming back to Chabad.org, they're just relating the standard Talmudic ruling. So they have around the time of Tisha B'Av, or the destruction of the Second Temple, you have 3 weeks where they focus on rebuke, because they're going to rebuke Judah for having the Second Temple destroyed. I'm not sure how to say that correctly, but it's the concept is sort of lost on us, on the house of Ephraim, because 3 weeks of rebuke prior to the destruction of the Second Temple, and then 7 weeks of consolation following the destruction of the Second Temple. But as far as Joseph can tell, I mean, have we seen any actual change? Why aren't we reading Jeremiah? Because, if we're focusing on Tisha B'Av, Jeremiah is the more appropriate book, because Jeremiah shows exactly the same patterns that Judah is practicing today. Same for the house of Ephraim. So all we have to do is take a look at the sins of our forefathers to know what we are doing. But how can we do that if we're not reading the word of Elohim? Because we're cherry picking passages to suggest that something has changed and now the relationship is being rehabilitated. When in actual fact, we're just cutting out passages that don't fit with our narrative, inconvenient passages, so to speak. Well, we'll focus on this more next week, because next week is the offending week where Isaiah 53 was removed. So here we are in Parashat Shoftim. It's rather short. They didn't have chapter and verse in the Middle Ages, so they just cherry picked the section that they liked, and then that became the Haftarah. So now notice, we prefer to read whole chapters. That's just to get, we read cover to cover is our preference, to get the whole message, the whole counsel of Elohim. So 2 weeks ago in Parashat Ekev, we read 49, 50, and 51. So now this week, 2 weeks later, we're in Parashat Shoftim. And again, we're going to read all of chapter 51, and we're going to read all of 52. There's 3 verses that they're going to leave out. We believe they could very well have been included originally in next week's reading for Ki Tetzei, because you only have 10 verses there. So what got cut out, there's only 10 verses. We'll talk about that next week, and we'll read Yeshayahu 53 next week. So we want to get the full context. Let's come to Yeshayahu chapter 51, starting in verse 1. Yahweh says, "Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness. You who seek Yahweh, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. Look to your origins. Look to the Tanakhic origins, not the Talmudic origins. We're not looking at Yavne. We're looking to Avraham, our father, and to Sarah, who bore us. For Yahweh called Avraham alone, and Yahweh blessed him and increased him because he obeyed." What about us, brethren? So comfort, verse 3, "For Yahweh will comfort Zion." We're going to talk about who or what or where is Zion, because the day will come when spiritual Zion will again dwell in physical Zion. And Yahweh will comfort all her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of Yahweh. Joy and gladness will be found in it, thanksgiving and the joy and the voice of melody. Verse 4, who's being spoken to? "Listen to me, my people, and give ear to me, my nation. For the Torah will proceed from me, and I will make my justice rest as a light of the peoples." So his justice is going to be a light unto the peoples. "My righteousness is near, my salvation has gone forth, and my arms will judge the peoples," all the nations. "The coastlands, which is faraway nations, will wait upon me, and on my arm, which is Yeshua, they will trust." Drop down to verse 11. "The arm is going to be busy, And so in verse 11, the ransomed of Yahweh shall return and come to physical Mount Sion with singing, with everlasting joy on their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness. Sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Isn't that going to be nice? This is after the tribulation. Verse 12, Yahweh says, even I am he who comforts you. He's speaking to Ephraim here, not to Judah. Not that he won't comfort Judah also, but he's speaking to Ephraim and that portion of Judah that's accompanying Ephraim. He says, who are you that you should be afraid of a man who will die and of the Son of Man who will be made like grass burned up in the oven? Why are we afraid of things in the manifested material realm when the spiritual realm is completely primary and Yahweh is completely in charge of everything that happens? We have a study called About Predestination or About Predetermination on the website. It's in Nazarene Scripture Studies, Volume 1. Verse 16, he says, I have put my words in your mouth. I have covered you with the shadow of my hand, that I may plant the heavens, lay the foundations of the earth, and say to Sion, you are my people. Now, there's many different interpretations of that, but my people, Ami, that's what is said to the house of Ephraim when Yahweh's bringing us back for the regathering or the ingathering. Verse 17, awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem. Here it's probably the physical Jerusalem, which is occupied by Judah at this point in time. Now, why they chose this for comfort, I don't quite get. You who have drunk at the hand of Yahweh, the cup of his fury. You have drunk the dregs of the cup of trembling and drained it out. Help me to understand the comfort. Verse 18. There's no one to guide her among all the sons of the Talmud that she has brought forth, because they don't read the Tanakh, they don't know what's going on. Nor is there any who takes her by the hand among all the sons she has brought up to lead her in the way of Yahweh, that she might hear his voice and obey it. 3,500 years translates to what? Obedience to Yahweh or something else? Verse 19, these two things have come to you. Who will be sorry for you? Desolation and destruction, famine and sword. By whom will I comfort you? You won't obey me. You won't hear my voice and do what I say, including my written word. Verse 21, we covered this before. Therefore, please hear this, you afflicted and drunk, but not with wine. This is the drunkards of Judah, to go along with the drunkards of Ephraim of Isaiah 28. Verse 22, thus says your Adon, Yahweh, and your Elohim, who pleads the cause of his people because he wants us to obey him so we can survive. But he redeems us. He says, see, I have taken out of your hand, after all this destruction, the cup of trembling, the dregs of the cup of my fury. You shall no longer drink it. We're talking about the tribulation. We're talking about the time of Jacob's trouble, and especially we're talking about the cup judgments. Those will not be good times to be either in the land of Israel or in the United States of America. Details, see the Revelation study. Verse 23, but Yahweh takes care of us. After we're cleansed, after we're purified, after both houses have gone back to the Tanakh, we've gotten rid of Trinitarianism, we've gotten rid of the church fathers, we've gotten rid of the Talmud. Then, when Mystery Babylon has fallen after trumpet 7, he will put the cup into the hand of those who afflict you, especially Judah. You who have said to you, lie down that we may walk over you. And you have laid your body like the ground and as the street for those who walk over. It's going to be a very difficult time in the land. We come to chapter 52. When it's done, he says, awake, awake, put on your strength, O Tzion. We're talking physical Tzion or spiritual Tzion. Put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the set apart city, for the uncircumcised and the unclean shall no longer come to you after Armageddon. Shake yourself from the dust, arise, sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose yourself from the bonds of your neck, O captive daughter of Tzion. Is he talking to Judah? He's talking to Ephraim there. He's talking to Ephraim because it's the captive daughter of Tzion. There's a physical Tzion. There's, I'm sure, Judah. Wow, I mean, it's not my decision, but I've met some very dedicated people who try to follow Elohim's word. But here we're talking about the captive daughter of Tzion. So we're talking about Joseph in the dispersion. Verse 5. Once we're redeemed, Yahweh's very kind. He's extremely generous. We went out into the dispersion because we weren't obeying, but he says he's going to separate us from our sins as far as the east is from the west. So verse 5, he says, now therefore, what have I here, says Yahweh, that my people are taken away for nothing. Or for nothing. We were taken in captivity for nothing. He's being extremely generous, extremely kind, purifying us exceedingly more than we deserve. Those who rule over them make them wail, says Yahweh. That's what's coming up. And my name is blasphemed continually every day because they call on the name of the Lord, which is Baal. Therefore, my people shall know my name, which is not only the specific pronunciation, but more importantly, the character, the fame of Yahweh, and including his name. Therefore, they shall know in that day that I am he who speaks. Behold, it is I. This ties to Hosea chapter 2 and the wedding feast. So we know that this is Armageddon that's being spoken of here. Verse 7. Notice the references to Yeshua. They're all through Yeshayahu. The second half of Yeshayahu is just chock full of Yeshua. And this is a reference to the renewed covenant. So this is the job of the Shaliachim to further the good news. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Tzion, your Elohim reigns. Spiritual or physical Tzion? You can make arguments for both. He says, your watchmen shall lift up their voices. With their voices they shall sing together, for they shall see eye to eye when Yahweh brings back Tzion. He can't be bringing back a physical Tzion. He's bringing back spiritual Mount Zion, which again will dwell in physical Mount Zion. Verse 9. Break forth into joy, sing together, you waste places of Jerusalem. For Yahweh has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. Verse 10. Yahweh has made bare his set apart arm, which is Yeshua, in the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation, Yeshua, of our Elohim. 11. Now we have the ingathering. Depart, depart, go out from there. Touch no unclean thing. Go out from the midst of her. Be clean, you who bear the vessels of Yahweh. Not the physical vessels, but emptied from vessel to vessel, those kinds of vessels. Verse 12, for you shall not go out with haste. That can't be Judah because Judah's in the land, he's staying there. But for Joseph and those of Judah attached to Joseph, we shall not go out with haste, nor shall we go by flight. For Yahweh will go before us, and the Elohim of Israel will be our rear guard. So now we come to 3 verses that were edited out of the Haftarah series. We'll talk about that next week again. So verse 13, And this is all about Yeshua. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Just as many were astonished at you, so his visage was marred more than any man, which means the Romans tore him up when they flogged him, when they scourged him, and his form more than the sons of men. Verse 15, so he shall sprinkle or startle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths at him, for what had not been told to them they shall see, and what they had not heard they shall consider. That's a paraphrase of what Elohim said over Shaliach Shaul, what he would do. So now that's the prelude to Yeshayahu 53, which we'll see next week. But what we want to see now is, what does Torah government look like in the order of kings and priests? And just before we begin, again, I hope I will say this appropriately. I mean to address this to the house of Ephraim, because we have very many Jewish brothers and sisters who are very dedicated and faithful in their efforts to build a kingdom. Again, it's not the correct kingdom. It's not the correct version, but Ephraim needs to get busy. And let me just show you, this is kind of the spirit that's on Ephraim. I believe this is Thomas Nelson Publishers. For full disclosure, I just started with the New King James Version many years ago. I had the King James. I found it a little thick to read, so I figured, well, we'll work with the New King James. That'll be similar. And I've just been going with it. We might change that to the Lexham English Bible at some point. We got to do some more analysis, but it's looking like Lexham will be the new Bible version, base version. It's not perfect. None of them are perfect, but just not to pick on Thomas Nelson or the New King James Version, but just to pick on the spirit that is on Ephraim. So here we have Tehillim, or Psalms, chapter 90 and verse 12. This is their verse a day. You can sign up. They'll send it to you. English, Spanish, some other languages. And it says, so teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And if we read Psalm 90, what it's really saying is, we only have so much time on this earth. We have to be careful to use it for Elohim. That's the true message of Psalm 90. But take a look at this. We're hiking. Esau was a man of the field. Esau was hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, body surfing, surfboarding, not focusing on the things of Yahweh. He was a man of the field. Whereas Jacob was a complete man, dwelling in tents, so dwelling in cities. He was an urban type. Now, there's room for both, urban and rural. That's not a problem. But take a look at the message here. Take a look at the subliminal messaging. We're going to gain a heart of wisdom by going hiking and looking out over the valley and enjoying the beauty of nature, enjoying Yahweh's creation. So we're enjoying. Disfrutar, they say in Spanish. So we're just enjoying. You don't live to work for Yahweh's kingdom. We don't live to serve Yahweh. We enjoy Yahweh. We're not Yahweh's servants. We're the Bless Me Club. And this qualifies as a heart of wisdom. Okay, so this is the general spirit that we're talking about that's on the house of Ephraim that we need to wake up to so that we can overcome it. Because this kind of a subtle, insidious red horse spirit crouches by the door for all of us. We're raised in Esavite culture. We have to take pains to separate ourselves from Esavite culture. That's not to pick on Thomas Nelson or the New King James. That's just to pick on a broad, easy road type of advertising. So what did Mashiach Nagid actually say to do? Well, Yohanan, or John, chapter 8 and verse 31, Yeshua said to those of the Yehudim who believed on him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. Now, what does he mean by this word abide? Does it mean we have to stay in his word? We're not waterboarding. We're not going to slip and slide water park. We're not hiking for fun. We're focusing on building the kingdom because we've laid down our lives in the world, and now we live to serve him. Now we live to help build his kingdom. So we abide in his word. We stay in his word. So we're either doing something for the kingdom or we're reading, but whatever we're doing, we don't have free time. We're not playing poker with our buddies. We're not out sailing. We're serving. We're praying. What can we do? How can we further? When you, again, when you have a wife who loves her husband, or you have a bride who loves her bridegroom, you don't have to tell her to get busy, to be doing things to help him. She will automatically find ways to help him. That's just the fruit of loving her husband. And that's how he expects us to be toward Yeshua. And if we're not that way, if it's the bless me club instead of that how can I serve you club, we're going to have big troubles in the tribulation. It's not going to work for us like that. We need to abide in his word, to be his disciples, to survive the tribulation. So what are we talking about in the context of Torah government? As we saw before in Maaseh or Acts chapter 1 and verse 6, when the disciples had come together, they asked Yeshua, saying, Adon, Master, will you at this time restore the kingdom, not to the house of Judah, but to Israel or Ephraim or Joseph? And Yeshua didn't say, no, we're not going to reestablish or restore the kingdom to Israel. He just said, you don't need to know when. You just need to focus on what I'm telling you to do. Verse 7, he said to them, it is not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father has put in his own authority. Verse 8, but rather you shall receive power. Have we received power? You shall receive power when the set-apart Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me, not just in Jerusalem and not just in all Judea and Samaria, but to the variable ends of the earth. All four ends of the earth, that was our job. That wasn't going to happen overnight. So Judah rejected Yeshua because they expected him, as we saw, to bring back all the exiles, to bring back all the lost tribes, to raise those armies for the final battle 2,000 years sooner than it could be done, because that wasn't Yeshua's way. He wasn't raising a temporal army. He was raising up a spiritual army, and there will be manifestations in the temporal realm. We talk about that somewhat in the Revelation study. There's a lot more, Father willing, that we can talk about that. But our job is to be witnesses to him to the ends of the earth, in keeping with the Great Commission in Matthew chapter 28. And in order to keep the Great Commission in Matthew chapter 28, there's a specific order that we need to keep. Okay, it's not a democracy. We're not the red horse. It's not a red horse democracy. It's white horse Joseph. It's an order. It's the order of kings and priests, and there's rules for it. So we come to Acts chapter 6, and we can start to look at the organization they had in the first century. There's some very interesting things to see here. It tells us a lot about what we should be doing today. Verse 1, now in those days, in the late Second Temple period, when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily third tithe distribution for the poor, the widow, and the orphan. So what we see is that the Hebrews were in charge, meaning the, at that point, black horse, but also white horse Nazarenes were in charge. And then you had the Greco-Roman Babylonian Hellenists were not in charge, which is why their widows ended up getting neglected. So it's obviously important that everyone that's participating is taken care of. So in verse 2, the 12 summoned the multitude of the disciples and said, it is not desirable, it's not good for anybody. It's not good for you. It's not good for no one. It doesn't serve Elohim. if we're going to leave the first tithe ministry of the word of Elohim and go and serve tables, taking care of the third tithe. Obviously, third tithe needs to be taken care of. It's important that it be taken care of, but first tithe is also necessary to take care of. That's the service to Elohim. And again, I just don't know that Ephraim understands just how important it is that we have a standing priesthood. Judah understands the importance of having people making prayers day and night. Maybe not according to Elohim standards, but they understand the need for an organized priesthood. Ephraim is just waiting on the rapture bus. So, brethren, we need to pray that Ephraim will please stop listening to what they learned from their pastors, stop listening to what they learned from other sources, and that we all go carefully by the word of Elohim and no other source. So let's take a look again. These were the main subsects of the first century Nazarene. So even within Nazarene Israel, you had subsects, or you had splinter or spin-off sects, look alike but are not the same sect. We're going to talk about this a lot more in the documentary coming up. But you had the Min HaNetzarim, their black horse, and their job was to go and recover Ephraim. They believed and practiced the Torah and the prophets, just like Yeshua said, but not Talmud. This is the sect that's spoken of in Jude verse 3. There's only one chapter. Then you had the believing Pharisees, which are like the rabbinic, one-house, messianic Jews of today. Okay, they preach Talmud in addition to Yeshua, which is absurd, because if you know what Yeshua taught, then you know Yeshua was against the Zugot pairs, he was against the Talmud, he was against replacement theology. Now, if we understand what we're reading in Acts chapter 15, then we see that the one-house messianic rabbis lost the argument in Acts 15. Once again, they didn't get the memo. They didn't get it back in the first century either. So then you also have your Esav or Edomite Hellenists. That's what we're talking about here. Their widows are being neglected in the daily distribution. And what a Hellenist is, what the red horse Esav is they don't believe what Yeshua said about the need to believe and practice the whole Torah and the prophets. They don't believe what Yeshua said, that not to think that he came to do away with the Torah and the prophets. So what they do is, and get this, Esav claims faith on Yeshua as his master and king, but he doesn't obey Yeshua as his master and king. Now, Messianic movement, how many of us fit that pattern? How many of us claim Yeshua's blood, claim to be his servant, claim to love him with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and yet we're still looking for excuses not to build on the rock and to do everything that he said? Okay, we can find examples of the Hellenists in Mark chapter 9, verses 38 through 40. We do a drash on that in the Nazarene Israel study. We also find it Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. Again, we do a drash on that in the Nazarene Israel study. You have a related Esavite, which I'm not sure they could even be the same group, but you have what we call the Messianistics. It's 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 20. And the basic concept behind Gnosticism is it's enough to know Yeshua is the Messiah. That's all you have to do. Just know Yeshua is the Messiah. There's nothing to obey. Just receive the free gift. Just read your New Testament only Christianity Bible. Throw the Tanakh away and you're done. Because the works of the church fathers say so. Because the Trinity says so. You don't have to obey. Just knowing Yeshua is Mashiach is enough. Brothers and sisters, how many of us fall in that category without even knowing it, because we claim his blood, but we do something less than all of his commandments? It's a question I'm asking. How many of us are guilty of disobedience through slack, just like our forefathers in the Midian? So, continuity, verse 3, Acts 6 and verse 3, they said, therefore, brethren, since we need to stay on the first tithe ministry, since you need to have a standing priesthood representing you, here's what we do to take care of the third tithe need. We're going to establish a staff, so to speak, 7 men of good reputation, full of the set apart spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will continue to give ourselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word, meaning the first tithe priesthood ministry. If we read it without eyes to see how it applies to the same principles and precepts as we read in the Torah portion, we can easily read over it. That's how we were all taught in the house of Asaph, is to look over the connections, because you can just read the New Testament because the old doesn't apply. It's gone away. You don't need it anymore. Replacement theology is not replacement theology. There's a need for two different kinds of armies. In the order of kings and priests, we do not have temporal armies. We are allowed to influence the leaders of nations if we will organize in order to do so. More on that later. How else are we supposed to organize, brethren? Okay, we have lots of people with lots of initiatives, starting their own movements, starting their own organizational structures, doing what they want, coming up with their own ideas, how we're supposed to be gathering together. And typically it's something easy and lazy, like, hey, I know, let's get over at my house and we can all eat lunch together and do a Bible study together, and pretend that that's the fullness of the Great Commission, when in fact we all know that's not the fullness of the Great Commission. And replacement theology is a very grave sin. And if we perform replacement theology, once again, how do we expect to survive the tribulation? This is what we're supposed to be doing. Shaul starts to explain in Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 19, speaking to returning Ephraim, to the Gerim. He says, now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners. You're no longer estranged from the nation, but now you're fellow citizens with the set-apart ones and the members of the household of Elohim. Now, here's the key. Having been built on a single foundation of apostles and prophets, Yeshua HaMashiach himself being the chief cornerstone, because he's the one who shows us what to do, because he's Mashiach Nagid. That's his job, is to show us how to walk out the Torah of Moshe, especially in renewed covenant times, especially out in the dispersion. So he has been our guide. He has nourished us. He has taken care of us. He is bringing us together little by little, at least the 10% remnant that wants to survive. Verse 21, it says, in whom the whole building, the whole temple of Yeshua, being fitted together worldwide, grows into a set-apart temple in Yahweh, in the dispersion. Verse 22, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of Elohim in the Spirit. But the difference is a dwelling place or a building. It's a building. It's an organized building. You have to have a foundation, walls, roof, or you have no functional space. So I couldn't find the temple slide where we liken Yeshua to the cornerstone and the foundation, but I found this, which it's a different analogy for the same thing, because Yeshua is the living root, and we want to graft into the root. The apostles, or specifically the council, the Nazarene council that assembled in Acts 15, Also in Acts chapter 21, the single foundation of apostles and prophets, or also called the foundation of apostles and elders. It bears the weight of the living tree. So it needs the support, it needs the nourishment from the rest of the tree, which it supports. So you've got Yeshua, he's the root down below the soil. He's pushing up moisture, nutrients. He's nourishing the tree. Then you have the support trunk, and then you have elders are the branches, deacons are smaller branches and twigs, and then you have disciples. And each part of the vine, each part of the living tree needs to contribute to the overall health of the tree. If you're not contributing to the health of the tree, then you will be cut out as a branch and you become withered and burned in the fires of the tribulation. Because Yahweh is serious about getting back to purity. He wants that 10% that loves him enough to do what he says, and the 90% is not going to make it, brethren. And I pray for each and every one of you that you will hear this message and wake up to the fact that this is Yahweh's word for us today. We need to obey him, or what does he want us for? Why should he help us survive the tribulation unless we're going to serve him with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our strength? Stop focusing on fleshly things. Stop focusing on being carnal, but to focus on spiritual things. To pray and to work for bringing the kingdom of Elohim down to earth. So continuity verses 2 and 3, they said, we need to keep on the first tithe. We need someone to handle the third tithe. Now, that also implies that they were, in fact, paying third tithe at that point in time. So what we see is the standards of the first century assembly. And here we have, how many people do we have out here in the dispersion that don't want to keep the same standards of the first century? We call ourselves Hebrew roots. We call ourselves first century believers. We call ourselves original Nazarenes, but we're not keeping the same standards as in Scripture because it's hard, right? It's a narrow and afflicted path. That's why we don't want to do it. Yahweh will have it. He will have a pure bride. He doesn't want a lot of brides. He just wants a pure one. So he tells us, so just like you had the marital ketubah, the Torah at Mount Sinai, which tells the bride how to refine and purify herself, should she have a heart to do so, this Torah speaks of Yeshua, Mashiach Nagid. And it tells us nope, that's incorrect. Sorry about that. It should be Ephesians, Ephraim, chapter 4 and verse 11. It says that Yeshua himself is the one who gave us, hang on a second, is this also? It does, okay, so there we go. Yeah, no, should be Ephraim or Ephesians, my apologies, verse 11. And Yeshua himself, if you're a Yeshua believer, chew on that. If you're not a Yeshua believer, pray about Daniel 9, 25 and 26. Yeshua himself gave some of his people to be apostles. Some of them he gave the gift of being prophets, special gift for hearing in the Spirit. Some of them have the gift of an evangelist. You have some who are pastors and some who are teachers, but they're all supposed to work together to build his kingdom. They're all supposed to take these five-fold ministry gifts and work them together to equip all the saints for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Mashiach. What a key phrase. What a key phrase, for the edifying of the body of Mashiach. Did we ever wonder what our purpose is? Are we just coming to assembly just to get fed? Are you tuning into this video so you can get fed, but you don't want to do anything to serve your husband, your bridegroom, Yeshua? Where's the heart? You say, well, he knows our hearts. He sure does if he doesn't see our fruits. We want him to know our heart for seeing our fruits, giving him the finest of our fruits, because we're not living our lives for ourselves anymore. We're living our lives to serve our husband and our king. So our husband and king gave apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and also teachers to work together to equip the saints for the work of ministry, to build up the body of Mashiach. And notice, this isn't Norman Willis Ministries. This is Nazarene Israel. And the purpose is to establish exactly what Yeshua said to do in the first century, as recorded in the pages of the renewed covenant. And if we're not going to do that, aren't we setting up our own kingdom? If we're setting up a separate ministry that is not the original first century sect of the Nazarenes, then how is that different than Korach's rebellion? How is that different than Nadav and Avihu bringing strange fire? So how long are we supposed to obey Yeshua? Well, until we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of Elohim, until we're all perfected, until all of Israel, first we start with Ephraim, then we'll be joined to Judah. We have to start here until all of Ephraim comes to the unity of the faith, the 10% that's going to repent and live, and then we're joined together with brother Judah. Okay, then we'll revert to the Levitical order, but right now we're under the order of kings and priests, the order of Melchi-Tzedek. So we keep at this order of Melchi-Tzedek until we come to be perfect men, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Mashiach, meaning we have learned to walk like him in spirit and in truth. And this is what we do so that we can no longer be children, spiritual children who are tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine of the red horse messianic movement, by the trickery of the book salesman and the cunning craftiness of the Babylonian deceitful plotting, because they have something else for us to do than what the renewed covenant says to do. You can learn all about Yeshua, but you never end up becoming like Yeshua. And that's the 90% that's not going to make it. So the solution in verse 15 is to speak the truth in love. You can be emphatic, but to speak the truth in love. The truth is the Torah. If you're in the Torah of Moshe, you'll end up in the Tanakh. If you end up in the Tanakh, you'll end up in the Brit Chadasha. So we need to speak the truth in love so that we can grow up. The body can pull itself up by its bootstraps, so we can keep climbing that ladder till we reach him who is in the heavens, who is our head, Mashiach. We need to keep climbing that ladder so we can rise up to his level where he is, so we can worship him there. And what he tells us, and this is so hard for Ephraim to hear, this is so hard for peacetime mentality, for the Bless Me Club to hear. Because, oh, Yahweh, please give me what I want. Oh, thank you so much. Here's another list of things what I want. He doesn't want that. He's a war Elohim. He's busy on the battlefield. He needs support. He needs backup. What does he want a bride who's just sitting around always asking things for herself for? Oh, please give me this. Oh, please give me that. So we'll talk about that analogy more in other places. But we as the bride, it's a crowd-funded operation, and we are the crowd. It's rent your oar and be thankful they have a seat for you. But Ephraim receives the free invitation to the Olympic tryouts and figures she's already got the gold medal, so he doesn't have to make any effort. So Ishmael has countries. Esav has countries. Judah has a country. Ephraim, Are we forming a stick so we can have a government, so we can survive and dwell in the land? Are we seeking the blessings and the consolations of organizing ourselves to form a Torah government? Okay, well, Torah government is going to have Torah taxes, and that's what the tithes are. You've got a tax to support the first tithe, standing priesthood. You've got another 10% tax to make sure that the feasts are a good time for yourself and your family. Don't neglect it. It's not your money, it's Elohim's money. He tells you to steward it for him. And then there's a third tithe, 2 years in 7, which we talk about that in the Torah government study. Yeah, we'll talk more about that. So there's the Levitical method. There's also the renewed covenant method where you set something aside for Elohim every week. As Yahweh has blessed you, as we spoke about in the Torah portion, in Re'eh, and also this week, as Yahweh has blessed us, we are to have a heart to help him further his kingdom ministry. And the priesthood doesn't spend it on themselves, but that doesn't make ministry free. So, and the priesthood doesn't take home a paycheck because you don't go home in the priesthood. You continue to serve in the priesthood. But we have ministers who take home 6 and even 7-figure paychecks, and the people support them. Is that because they're having a heart to serve Yeshua and to do what he says so that they and their families can survive the tribulation and go back home to the land of Israel? Or why is that? If you're going to be a member of Yeshua's kingdom, you're going to need to pay Yeshua's taxes. If you want Yeshua to show up for you in the day of judgment, then we need to show up here in helping him build his kingdom. And it's a joy. Why wouldn't it be a joy? If we love him, it should be a joy to do these things for him, because after all, we're going to be his slave queen or slave princess. But if we love him, we share in the joy of seeing Mashiach Nagid get the kingdom he so richly deserves. So we're going to do what we can. We're going to provide, working together. Every part of the body is going to do its share, just like every part of the vine needs to contribute to the health of the tree or the vine, or it gets pruned out. It's the same concept. Okay, there's no room for dead wood in Ephraim. There's going to be a lot of reduction because Yahweh's already said he's not going to take 90% of Ephraim back home. Because why? Because they're still in the red horse. They're still tainted pink. They're still lukewarm. They're still not doing all they can to cause growth of the body, which is Yeshua's kingdom, or the edifying or the upbuilding of itself in love, meaning they're not helping Yeshua's kingdom to grow, meaning they're burying their mina. Enough said. So this is a very important area we need to talk about, brethren, especially for the house of Ephraim. How do we get these judges and officers in all of our gates? So it's Parashat Shoftim, judges, meaning judges and officers. How do we do that in the renewed covenant? So there's a lot of people that they don't want to do anything because they're looking for reasons and excuses to get out of following the principles and the precepts in the Torah. But if we love Yeshua, why would we look for ways to get out? Why would we mistake, oh, I get to be lazy, I get to educate myself, and Yeshua is going to automatically desire me? It doesn't make sense, brethren. If we love him, don't we need to be active and busy for him? So who are the judges and officers that get appointed in all of our gates, which are the deacons, the elders, and the priesthood? We show that in the Torah government study. So how are they selected? Now, this is very important. We're going to experience growth here in the next few years. We're going to experience the second wave. We'll talk about that in the documentary series. But we had a first wave of return, and now we will soon experience a second wave of return, starting 2,000 years after the start of Yeshua's ministry. The first wave came back 2,000 years after Yeshua's birth. The second, much larger wave will start 2,000 years after the start of his ministry until the end of his ministry, 2030, which is an important year for other reasons. And then there will be at least a third and maybe a fourth wave, but we'll talk about that in the documentary series. But brethren, we're getting ready to experience growth. And part of the problem that we have is we get a lot of requests, and we want to encourage anyone who wants to serve Yahweh for the sake of serving Yahweh. But understand, you're talking about a difficult lifestyle. You're talking about leading by example, and it's a narrow and afflicted path, and there's rules for it. But this is how he knows whether we love him or not. Are we willing to help his kingdom grow? So we are going to need elders, deacons, Father willing, someday more volunteers for the priesthood level, whose heart is all in, without inheritance in the land, giving everything to Yeshua's ministry work. In his time, we know that it will be. But the problem is we can't afford to lay hands on anyone suddenly. And it's been difficult because we had certain people who've warranted to us that they believe the doctrine when they don't, that they agree with the policies when they don't, they agree with the teachings when they don't. And so we start with them, and it takes us very time intensive for us. It takes a lot of time to get to know with people, work with people. Ideally, you're supposed to know someone for years, but we're in a difficult situation. We're trying to start up. And we'll talk about this in a few verses from now when we get to Titus. But there is a need, and I've seen some amazingly gifted people. They have talents, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, administrators, other gifts. And all of them are necessary to build Yeshua's kingdom. And this is what would please Yeshua, is if we would take his mission to heart, which his Father gave him, which was to send him to get us to build him a kingdom in his absence. It's not easy building a kingdom, but that's what he wants. And if we love him and want to help him in his divine mission, we need to be active for him and not just watching and reading and learning. We need to be making a commitment for him. So I ask you, please, to pray for the commitment of the 10%, to pray that Yahweh would send out workers into his harvest. Now, what kind of workers? Committed workers. We see how committed. So we come to 1 Timothy chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it says, "This is a faithful saying." This is Shaliach Shaul. "If a man desires the position of an elder, he desires a good work." Remember, in the Torah portion, it's supposed to show the people the work that they should do. This is a renewed covenant application. Okay, but what standards? We saw in the Torah that there were standards for elders. They had to be men of truth. They had to fear Elohim. They had to be not corruptible, paraphrasing. But verse 2, he says, "An elder must then be blameless." Okay, if he wants, this is a lofty work. This is an important kingdom building work, and he needs to be capable of operating sincerely, honestly, with the correct doctrine. He has to have the right heart toward this thing. It says, "An elder must then be blameless with regards to the Torah, blameless with regards to the prophets, blameless with regards to the standards explained in the Brit Chadasha, because it's the same principles and precepts, just a renewed covenant application for the dispersion. Now, as a leader in the land of Israel, I hope I will say this appropriately, in the land of Israel, under a Torah government, it's possible for kings and rich men to have more than one wife. That's something that is possible, but is not something that is ideal. So Israel only wanted one wife. He ended up with four. It's not an ideal situation. The original ideal was one man, one wife, together for life. That's it. That's what Genesis speaks of. That's the early example. That's the first use. So if that's the original ideal, okay, then in verse 2, we see that an elder who is effectively an example for the congregation, he should be the husband of one wife. And there's been all kinds of plural marriage teachings and all these things going on in the Messianic movement. We do not subscribe to those. Now, just briefly, I will say, we have met Muslim converts to Christianity, and they had 3 or 4 wives already. What are they supposed to do? Send them and their children away? Well, if the wives are all pleased to dwell, that's a separate situation. And then the children can be brought up in the faith. And that's Yahweh's will, is he's in favor of forming relationships and not breaking up relationships. However, that kind of thing is not legal in most Western Judeo-Christian countries. It is legal in some countries in Africa, but it's not the ideal. So please don't misunderstand me. It is absolutely not the ideal, which is why it says that the elder, who is the example for the congregation, should be the husband of only one wife. He also has to be temperate, sober-minded. He has to have good behavior. He should be hospitable. He should be able to teach, not given to wine, but sober-minded, not violent, but in control of his spirit, not greedy for money. We saw that in the Torah of Moshe. Not corruptible, but gentle, not quarrelsome. He's not covetous. He's not in this thing for himself. Now, I don't know how many times I've heard people offer, I will, make me an elder and I will collect the people's tithes, and then I will send a tithe of the people's tithes. And then we have to say, plus your tithe. They say, what? It's like, because that's how it works, is that you have to make a commitment. You have to serve as you can. So Yeshua served as he could. Yeshua had every right to sit back, but he didn't do that. Yeshua led from the front. Yeshua served and led by example. So, for example, I have a military disability pension. I got hit pretty hard in the service, some other issues. I give 2/3 of it I give all of it to the work. About 1/3 of it gets spent on my upkeep. That's what I have to have in order to live. And I try to minimize what I have, what I need to live, so as to make more funds available for the work. But quite frankly, brethren, if I didn't have that support, this ministry would, I don't know. I know that Yahweh would provide for his work somehow. But when we talk about phrases like not covetous, okay, and then when we have people who say, well, let me be your representative and we'll collect the tithes and we'll use your logo for sales, we'll put it on our merchandise and we'll make a bunch of money using Yahweh's name. And it's like, what's the difference between that and making a house of merchandise? Yahweh will have purity in his house. And if we profane his house by having profane spirits and profane attitudes, it's not glorifying to him. We must not be fleshly, especially not at the leadership or example level. He has to be someone who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. So you have to know how to lead a family. For if a man doesn't know how to rule his own family in his own home, where he has authority, how will he take care of the assembly of Elohim where you don't have the same authority? You do have authority to preach, and you do have authority over who can come in the door or not in conjunction with the council, but you don't have the same authority as you do with your own children and your own family. So if you don't know how to rule your own family, how can you serve others? How can you attract others and serve them by example? He should not be a novice, verse 6, lest being puffed up with pride, he shall fall into the same condemnation as the devil. This is a very difficult verse for us because we're getting ready for growth, and we need to know you before we can lay hands on you. We've had people that we felt that we knew, and then they say some shocking things. They say things like, Norman, why are you enforcing standards? I still have income. That's a paraphrase, but that's what he said. I've had people who pretend to believe all the doctrine. So in other words, I have money coming in. Why are you putting the standards where Yeshua put them? Okay, goodbye. You're gone. We don't do that here. Okay, we're not about making money. This is not about covetousness. This is not for us. This is for the service of Elohim. And if you're not making sacrifices yourself, you're doing something wrong. If you're not working as hard as you can for Yeshua, trying to make his world a better place, trying to bring the kingdom of Elohim down to earth, you're wrong. So please pray for our people that we will begin to understand Yeshua doesn't want a lazy bride. He doesn't want a bride that just comes to him when she wants something. So Yeshua works and his Father also works. So the bride needs to help. That's what queens did anciently. And we're following the ancient ways. So he shouldn't be a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he shall fall into the same condemnation as the devil. So this is very difficult for us. And please pray with us that Yahweh will send out his workers into his harvest. But to answer a common question, we just got some more questions again this last week. Would we lay hands on someone that we've never heard from them, we have no relationship with them, and then they will be an elder for us? And in the Messianic movement, people will do that because if there's a promise of income, they will lay hands on them, and then that's it. That's exactly what we're not supposed to do. That's what they do in the insert your name here ministries. Okay, they're not trying to build Yeshua's kingdom to Yeshua's standards. They're trying to build their own kingdom to feed their own belly. That's basically what they're doing. So we have a very difficult time here with verse 6. Please pray that Yahweh will send out his workers into his harvest. And one of the reasons we'll know that it's Yahweh's worker is he will have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. And that's not to say that we need to have the general overall approval of the world around us, because as we know, we will never have the world's approval. Esav outnumbers Ephraim 9 or 10 to 1. So we can't go ever by the democratic model because Esav, he'll lower the standards to make a broad, easy road, and then he's got more people, and that's the Babylonian democratic model in general. It's just corrupt start to finish. So not only do the elders need to be correct, chapter 3 and verse 8, likewise, the deacons also. Deacon means shamesh, it means a servant. So basically what you do, everyone enters in as a servant. So you'll start in the mailroom, everyone enters in as a sheep. Once you have good behavior, then you can be named as a deacon. Typically, it's good to know them for at least a couple of years, if not longer. Ideally, in communities, the Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches, they have communities where you know people their whole lives. So it's very clear to you who are the ones that the church means a lot to them, who are the ones that they're involved in either the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church, but you can know who they are because you've known them, you've seen them, you've been involved with them. Well, how do we do this in the house of Ephraim in the dispersion when we have individual families, or we have one from a city and two from a family, but no one's yet working together, brethren? How do we build the stick? How do we take a stick for ourselves? So please pray that our people will understand the necessity of falling on the stone and becoming broken so that we can fulfill his will. The deacons, the helpers, the shamashim, they must also be reverent. They shouldn't be double-tongued. Now, Brother Judah, with all respect, the double talk is legend. You say one thing and do another. You say one thing and then say another. You bracket it. It's got your zoogoat pairs so you can do whatever you want. Okay, the double talk is incompatible with the house of Joseph. Not given to much wine, meaning they're not sensualists. They're sober-minded, not greedy for money, not corruptible, same as the command in Torah, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. That means we're seeking Yahweh's face. We're trying to make sure our walk is blameless and pure. Now, verse 10, let these first also be tested. Let them, once they're tested, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. And some of our deacons are been really wonderful because some mistake will be made. There'll be some payment overage and they will return it. So that's the kind of thing with testing people. Take a look and see what they do. And be very careful when laying hands on someone because it's just very disruptive and it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources. And brethren, I don't know how to say this. We have a short amount of time to identify who are going to become the leaders of the second wave. And we need to know you before we can lay hands on you. So if anyone has a heart to become an elder, please know that you desire a good work, but you have to be tested first. So first you have to be tested as a deacon. We have to be tested as a sheep. Once you show good behavior as a disciple, then you can move to the servant or the assistant role of a deacon. And then from there, with good behavior, you can then progress to the role of an elder, or you can also become priesthood. It depends on how the Spirit directs, but the Spirit doesn't normally direct against the written word. And the written word says that we are to test people, to find them blameless. So the standards of Elohim are extremely high. So please pray for our people to understand just how high the standards are. Verse 11, husband and wife are one flesh, and the wife also will have a very busy time serving. It's a servant leadership role, and the call is to serve, to wash feet, to whatever is needed. Now, there's a relationship. There needs to be support for that. But the wives must be reverent, not slanderers, not busybodies, not talking behind people's backs. They must be temperate. They must be faithful in all things. So let the deacons be the husbands of one wife. So again, they're in an example role. So, and again, we'll say, so in the Torah government study, also in covenant relationships, it is possible in the land of Israel to have more than one wife, but it's not the ideal. So what you want is you want a happy family that's been married once, ideally, can be exceptions, but people who are putting Elohim first, they truly put Elohim first according to his spirit and the Torah. So they need to rule their families. And if they do this, brethren, this is, I think, what people don't understand. Deacons or servants is not a flashy role, but you obtain for yourselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith, which is in Mashiach Yeshua. So what does that say? And I know it's very difficult for people to want to dedicate themselves to be in a servant role. It's just so much easier to put up your ministry name in lights. And you can be like the rhinestone cowboy, riding out on a horse in the star-spangled rodeo, whatever you want. But if it doesn't serve Yeshua according to Yeshua's ways, if it doesn't follow the fivefold ministry pattern, and if it doesn't help to build on a single foundation of apostles and prophets with a single doctrine, which is why it was so important for Shaul and Barnabas to walk for 3 weeks to go to Jerusalem, then what are we doing, brothers? Are we building our own kingdoms, or are we building Yeshua's kingdom? And this is a question for each one of us to take seriously, especially if you're in ministry, especially if you're taking home a paycheck, especially if you're selling things. Are you building Yeshua's kingdom, or are you just teaching about Yeshua and taking home pay? Is it a broad, easy road for you? Is it a money earner for you? Or is it an opportunity to serve Yeshua according to his word and trust Elohim to provide for you? So we come to Titus chapter 1 and starting in verse 5. So Shaul, and again, we can see the order and organization here. So we know that Shaul reported to the Nazarene Beit Din in Acts 15 and Acts 21, the Nazarene Sanhedrin, the Nazarene Council, the Nazarene Beit Din Gadol. So the Beit Din was over Shaul. Shaul then commanded Timothy to appoint elders in every city. The elders then typically select their own deacons, and then the deacons are in charge of servant leading the families. That's at least 6 levels of organization, which is consistent with what we saw earlier, that the priesthood is a spiritual army. The body of Yeshua is a spiritual army or armies. And this is his will. So verse 5, he says, for this reason, this is why I left you in Crete, so that you should set in order everything that's lacking, everything that's not a spiritual army, everything that's not obeying everything Yeshua said to do, and appoint judges and officers in all of your gates. Appoint elders in every city as I commanded you. Now, obviously, it's going to look different than the Levitical order because we're not all co-located. So Judah has the advantage. They can join together. They can all get together for Shabbat because they typically live in the same cities. Very often, they'll form a community together. They'll move to walking distance around the synagogue. That's their level of dedication. That's how Judah does it. Very often they're city dwellers, not in every case, but very often they're city dwellers. Very difficult for Ephraim with our mission to go into all nations. We need to use electronic communications, particularly on Shabbat. We understand the reason. There's benefits if you are living together. There's great benefits in just shutting down electronically. We have different reasons for that than Brother Judah does, but it's tremendous just to be able to shut off the electronic devices for a day and spend the time with Elohim and his people. Now, again, for Ephraim, the distances are so great. If you're one in a city or 2 from a family, you may need electronic communications to communicate with other people. So we just wanted to mention that so that Judah understands why we use video so much. It's just simply because of the distances involved. But verse 5, he was to appoint elders in every city. So 6 levels of organization, but what standards? Verse 6, if a man is blameless according to Torah, what does that mean? That means he keeps all the Torah, every commandment in the Torah. He's blameless in the eyes of Elohim. Do we understand what that means in the house of Ephraim? That means we're keeping every Torah commandment. Obviously, we can't keep the ceremonial law. The things for inside the land don't apply to us in the dispersion, but Yeshua gives us specific commandments. It tells us to do them. Are we doing them? Okay. If a man is blameless in keeping the word of Elohim, and he's a good example, he's the husband of only one wife, he's raised his children well, they're faithful, and they're not accused of dissipation, wasting time, wasting energy, teenage delinquency, or insubordination, just out and out rebellion, but they're well ordered. They're a family in Scripture. He says, for an elder must be blameless according to the words of the Spirit. As a steward of Elohim, he should not be self-willed. He should not be presumptuous. He should not be quick-tempered, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. He should not be given to wine, but he should think soberly. He shouldn't be violent, but he should control his temper, not greedy for money, same principle, not corruptible, but hospitable, a lover of what is good. That would be Torah. That would be Scripture. Sober-minded and serving his people. Sober-minded, just, set apart, self-controlled. Holding fast, this is so important, holding fast to the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine, both to exhort and convict those who contradict. Now, in the eyes of many people, sound doctrine consists of that which they believe without regard to what Scripture says. House of Judah is in Talmud. House of Ephraim, still in many ways lost in the works of the church fathers and the Trinitarian system, lost in Mystery Babylon, haven't come out yet. Because why? Because we're not showing true fruits of repentance by obeying all of the Torah commandments. And that's something we need to do if we want to be part of the 10% that survives. So if we're going to be an example to the flock, if we're going to serve the flock in truth, we need to abide in Yeshua's word. And we know that all Scripture is profitable for doctrine. Okay, so what is sound doctrine except where we obey all of Yeshua's words? And it's difficult, but it's also great if you can exhort and convict those who contradict. Debate isn't my thing. I can reflect on it and tell you later. But this is the goal: is to increase Yeshua's kingdom, to grow the white horse territory, to increase the white horse, to purify ourselves by Yeshua's word. And that takes some exhorting and contradicting. And he says, verse 10, for there are many insubordinate, both idle talkers, people who just yap without knowing what they're saying, and deceivers, people who have an agenda. They're there to serve their bellies. Now, especially those of the circumcision. In context, we're talking to the Pharisees. We're talking to the rabbis here, the Orthodox Judah, whose mouths must be stopped because they subvert whole households, teaching things which they ought not for the sake of dishonest gain. Now, we could talk about this for a long time, but the point is, it's not only Judah who is deceiving the flock. So in the first century, it was Orthodox Judah, or the Pharisees, that was attempting to destroy the assembly for believing in the Tanakh. How should I say? In today's times, it's not only Orthodox Judah. We also have many who call themselves Messianics, who their mouths also must be stopped because they're teaching things that they ought not to for the sake of dishonest gain, for taking home a paycheck. They're going to create a ministry and a kingdom for themselves that doesn't help build Yeshua's kingdom. And that's wrong. That's evil. And we're not allowed to make up our own worship. For example, we saw in Vayikra or Leviticus chapter 10 and verse 1, we saw that Nadav and Avihu brought profane fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them, and they died for it. But what's the principle and the precept application for the renewed covenant times? Then we come to Bamidbar or Numbers chapter 16, starting in verse 1, and we see Korach led his rebellion, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. Moshe and Aharon are very much outnumbered. They rose up before Moshe and they said, "You take too much upon yourselves. Elohim chose you. Elohim is speaking through you, but you take too much on yourself. Because after all, we're about democracy here. We're about congregationalism. All the congregation is set apart, which is true. There's different levels of set apartness. There's different degrees. Every one of them is set apart, and Yahweh is among them. So why do you then exalt yourselves above the assembly of Yahweh? Why do you feel that your degree of set apartness is more than the set apartness of all the congregation and all these men of renown? Now, I hope, Father Yahweh, please give me the right words. I hope Yahweh will please lead me to speak this in such a way that is edifying for the body at large. We're removing his name so he doesn't, if he repents tomorrow, no one will know the difference. So we ended up calling him the spirit of Asaph, because that's basically what speaks through him, is a spirit of Asaph. Effectively, two horns like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. So this is from Parashat Midrash Behalotka, and you can see the details there if you want, but please pray for this brother. This brother needs prayer. This brother at some point or other is dedicated to the cause. He just perhaps has gotten some wrong education. No one has shown him or explained to him how it is that Yeshua's word really says we are supposed to operate. It's not up to us. It's not up to us. It's not our prerogative. It's not our pay grade. It's not our level to rewrite the commandments for our commander. That's not what you do in an army. It's not a rabble. It's not a mob. It's an order. It's a spiritual military order. Our weapons are not carnal right now, but we need to organize according to Scripture to show Judah who we are and that Yeshua brought us home. What a witness, what a testimony it's going to be for Yeshua when Judah sees the stick of Joseph forming before his eyes because of Yeshua. Does anyone else want that? So this brother who presently suffers from another spirit says, you are not going to be successful on a, so he wrote to us, oh my, he wrote to us basically demanding that we give him a job so he could tell us what to do, that we pay him to tell us what to do. So that's this brother. There's some real strong heads in the house of Ephraim. There's some real stiff necks, and this brother is one of them. So he says, you are not, we told him, we can't, how can we lay hands on you? We don't even know you. So we spoke allegedly fired. I remembered, yes, vaguely later. Oh, that guy. Oh, yeah. He already went down, like flush down the data dump because it's just not worth hanging on to that. So, you have to distinguish yourself from the red horse. You have to distinguish yourself from Esau, or you're not coming in Nazarene Israel. And we have made the mistake. We have tried too hard in the outreach. That's some of the mistakes that I have made. And so I repent of those. So now we have to wait for people to identify themselves by their fruits. So we don't even know this brother. I mean, we spoke briefly 5 or 6 years ago. I don't remember the conversation. He just struck me as someone who thinks he gets to do things his own way. And so we wrote him to say, we don't know you. We have to do things according to scripture. We can't lay hands on you and then you're doing that. We don't even know who you are. There's no accountability, nothing. What could happen to the sheep? All sorts of wrong things, bad things could happen to the sheep. We don't even know you. We have no background, nothing, no relationship, nothing. I was in Jerusalem. These brothers came from South Africa and said, let us be your representative for South Africa. Like, who are you? Yeah, I mean, people thinking about themselves instead of their master's benefit. People refusing to lay down their lives in the world because they're trying to live their lives in the world in Yeshua's name. It doesn't work like that. You have to lay down your life in the world to serve Yeshua, or you don't lay your life down for Yeshua. Yeshua knows the difference. Could you tell the difference if someone came to you and said, how do I help you? How do I help you? How do I expand your kingdom? How do I further your cause? Because you are the son of, you're all that. How do I help you with that? Versus, could you please give me this? Could you please give me that? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Please, could you give me this also? Oh, what could I do for you? Oh, nothing. The pride is out of control in the house of Ephraim. Again, Judah has his own problems. Judah just replaces the Torah wholesale with Talmud. It's a cover-up operation. But this brother, you're not going to be successful on a large scale, as if that matters, as if we're taking a census. Okay, the only reason for worrying about a large scale is either you're worried about your ego or you're worried about your income. That's the only two reasons to worry about numbers. Either way, it's an ego problem because you're putting what you want ahead of what Elohim says to do. So please pray for this brother to repent, because he asks us to realize that the faith once delivered to the saints is not the end all be all of Yah's work in the world. Excuse me? So, and I think what this brother doesn't understand is, once again, this is not insert your name here ministries by some other name. This is not make up your own doctrine ministries. This is not abide in Yeshua's word whenever you feel like it and don't worry about it the rest of the time ministries. It's an order. Yeshua himself established the order. We're just trying to fulfill Yeshua's commandments. And this brother thinks that we're on a high horse and we need to lose the pride because we want to uphold Yeshua's ministry and not start our own ministry or our own congregation of churches. And this is the messianic rung right here. We need to climb beyond that. Let's pray for that brother that he will do that. So he says, I am uniting many elders of Israel of different persuasions. Okay, so you're establishing a one world religion, effectively. And different backgrounds and okay, that's fine. Different walks of life, that's fine. Okay, but I'm replacing Yeshua's Torah in humility. That's what he said. So then he reproaches me. He says, your my way or the highway attitude isn't going to work. Okay, excuse me. My attitude that we have to do what Yeshua says, that our job is to do what Yeshua says. So imagine for the moment, Brother Levi doesn't feel the need to maintain the Torah of Moshe. Brother Levi has felt the need to replace the Torah of Moshe with his own thing. Because why? Because it's an ego boost for him. All of a sudden now he's a demigod. His word is more important than the word of Elohim. It supersedes the word of Elohim. The word of men has positive and negative precepts, and you have to obey exactly what the Zugot pair masters say to do, even though it says to negate the Torah of Moshe, exactly like Yahweh said not to do. So pray for this brother. He really needs help. Speaking with my assistant, Rivka, her summation says the one manifesting Esav's spirit thinks he's going to build Yeshua's kingdom without behaving like Yeshua, imitating Yeshua, walking like Yeshua walked, or even doing what Yeshua said. He's not going to build on the rock. He's going to build on sand. He's going to build his Congress of churches on sand. Well, brethren, we're called to do better than that. That's not good enough. Okay, Judah took the first step. They have theological, how should I say? They have a theological program and a Babylonian democratic program, sort of as a cover op. But they have done their part. They are back in, well, I can't say that, but they have taken the first step. They are back in the land. Caleb is back in the land. Now the ball is in our court. Now it's our turn. And this is something that we have to do in order to survive what's coming. This is something we have to show fruit worthy of repentance, meaning we have to obey all of his commandments, and not just the easy ones, not just the ones we like, but all. We have to submit first to Yeshua's spirit and then one to another in the spirit. And what that means is, first, we have to give up our lives in the world and put him first. We need to be good servants. We need to see how much can we improve the life of our master? How much can we grow his kingdom? We have to invest our mina and not spend it on ourselves. And the 10% that eventually does that will survive and will be joined one to another with Judah into one stick. But if we don't do that, we're told Esav is not going to survive what's coming. And it's not that many years away, brethren. I might live to see it. I hope so. But it's coming. And you have to obey Elohim to see life. We can't do like we're doing here today, everyone doing what seems good and right in his own eyes. We can't have a Congress of churches and then claim that we're following Yeshua's words because we didn't want to sit down and figure out what his word actually said. The ball is in our court. So what does a stick or a tree of Ephraim look like? Well, Yeshua is the root. He is who nourishes us. He takes care of us. Then you have the trunk. That's the Beit Din Gadol. That's the foundation of apostles and elders. Then you have elders supporting congregations. They have deacons to assist them. Ideally, more than one elder per congregation. We'll talk about that in other places. The church model of pastors does not exist. Pastor is a gift, not a role, not a job title, not a position. The Christian church doesn't know what they're talking about. So we have to conform ourselves to Yeshua's word, because there's reasons for that. This is his kingdom. We seek first the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness. This is it. This living tree model. We have to form a living tree, a living stick, the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim, witnessing to Yeshua's glory, witnessing to the fulfillment of his father's prophecies. And brothers, this job is in our hands. Our job is to take a stick or a tree for Yeshua and grow it, bring it together. There's only going to be 10% of us that are eventually going to go for it. Don't look left and right. Don't look to your neighbor, because he's probably not going anywhere. So 1 from a city and 2 from a family. Maybe there's 50 people in the city, but he's only going to save 1. So destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, destruction of the house of Esau. Difficult and terrible times are ahead, brethren, especially if we don't help Yeshua get what he wants, if we don't invest our minas to help Yeshua get what he wants. In closing, we already know from our studies a tithe of the people is going to come home. Or it might even be a tithe of the tithe. We don't know yet. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And that's why Yeshayahu says in chapter 10 and verse 22 that although your people, O Israel, Ephraim, Joseph, be as numerous as the sand of the sea and the stars of the heavens, because you just have to receive the free gift. You don't have to do anything for Yeshua. Just watch some free videos, learn some cool things, drink from all the fountains, keep your tithe mina in your own pocket, don't invest it. That way lies destruction, brethren. And he says, only a remnant of them will return, and the destruction of the rest, who are tainted pink by Esau, shall overflow with righteousness, because they hated Elohim. They hated Yeshua. They knew who Yeshua was. They knew he was Mashiach Nagid. They knew he was one like Moshe. Elohim manifested in the flesh to show us how the Torah of Moshe says to live. We knew that, but we didn't want to do everything he said, whether for pride, whether for personal gain. We want to keep our mina in our pocket. We want to bury our mina in the yard. If we don't dedicate ourselves to Yeshua, brethren, we won't survive. And the great comfort of a Torah government is that if we participate, if we help the little red hen, if we help to build Yeshua's kingdom, we ourselves will participate in his kingdom. Not only that, we will rule and reign with him in his kingdom. So the consolation and the comfort of obeying Elohim's commandments is that we will survive, and the meek shall then inherit the land. That's the message of Parashat Shoftim. The consolations of becoming his people and fulfilling his word is that we show ourselves to be his people for real, in spirit and in truth, and not just in lip service only. And with that, we will survive by his favor. But we need to differentiate ourselves from Esau, brothers. And the only way to do that is to obey him. We're all headed for the day of judgment. Shabbat Shalom.